This sunny morning, the protagonist tried to look out the window and was indignant because she had the body of a 10-year-old girl. Because even looking out the window was not an easy task for her. She saw the carriage arrive through the window and let out a sigh of relief because it had arrived today. The maids gossiped that they felt very sorry for this innocent boy, who was barely 10 years old. And the boy should already be going through something similar. The little girl was surprised that they called him an innocent boy and thought that those maids knew nothing. This boy's name was Sirius Hyperion, and the circumstances of his birth were too unusual to call him innocent. Only because he was still young. Although he had imperial blood in his veins, he was still an illegitimate son. But the main problem was that Sirius was born in the form of a wolf, not of a man. Legend has it that wolf's blood runs through the veins of the ruling Hyperion dynasty, and, in other words, Sirius is the arrival of the wolf, which happened 300 years later. Although his mother suffered from an incurable disease, she was still a warrior who became a legend of the empire. Everything would have been fine if the previous emperor had not had a successor. But unfortunately, when Sirius was born, the crown prince's spot was already taken. The appearance of a powerful creature caused chaos, and as a result, the crown prince got rid of everyone who demanded that Sirius be given the title of ruler of the empire, including his own father. But even he couldn't kill Sirius, and no one dared to openly take the life of the one who was the arrival of the wolf. Having ascended the throne, the prince became even more sensitive to this issue. He hid Sirius in a cold palace and tried in every possible way to get him out of the world as quickly as possible. In the end, when Sirius turned 10, he was expelled from the capital to the Duchy of Laud. This little dark-haired girl was also a member of the Laud family and was also waiting for the arrival of this young man. Her brother and sister, who constantly bullied her, approached the baby and told her to lock herself in her room. The girl was already used to their mischief and was sure that only madmen had gathered in this place. This little girl's family was very large because the Duke of Laud had up to 7 children. The first son went out alone in the middle of winter to hunt monsters, but never returned. And the second son died while trying to develop resistance to poisoning by drinking a small amount of poison. All the other children had also died, and now all the Duke's offspring consisted of the elder sister Courtney, elder brother Joseph, and the dark-haired baby Helen. The Duke was sure that sympathy weakens a person, and his children needed to get rid of useless emotions to get closer to the position of successor. And probably there is another reason why the emperor sent Sirius to this den of sociopaths and madmen and must hope he breaks. But somehow, even while in this house, Sirius eventually realizes how much he wants everyone to stand up. This was the content of the popular fantasy novel the girl read, but when she woke up as a character in this story, she thought nothing could be more terrible than such a turn of events, and it was necessary to develop a strategy to cope with all the difficulties. Therefore, the protagonist decided to strictly follow her plan and simply observe from the sidelines. By doing nothing, constantly following the main character, Sirius, who will solve everything with his own hands. And she will quietly get off the train she boarded as soon as the Lode family collapses. Suddenly, the girl heard a voice behind the door, and it was a beautiful chime, worthy of belonging to the main character. More than any doubt, Sirius was standing behind the door, but it was strange because he was there. And she understood that now that the main character had appeared, her family would completely derail. The baby wanted to close the door, but as soon as she approached, she immediately saw Sirius standing next to her. The boy said he thought the door opened by itself due to a draft. The girl understood how strange she was, because she had just decided to live as an invisible person, and immediately flew towards Sirius Hyperion. Over time, this face will be praised, saying that although he is crazy, he is still very handsome, so that it is simply impossible not to fall in love with him. And it is this owner of an impeccable face who will later kill more than 10 of his fiancés. The girl apologized for her tactlessness, but thanks to the young man, she suffered no harm. He suddenly took her hand and said she was quite pretty. The boy noticed that the girl resembled the Duke of Laud, so he asked who she was. The boy looked around and asked if this room was hers. The girl thought about how she could enter another aristocrat's room without an invitation. And a 10-year-old boy should understand that this is rude. There was nothing interesting in her room, and there wasn't even anything inside that would catch the eye. But the boy suddenly said he had exactly the same thing. Usually, when someone imagines the room of a young daughter of a duke, before their eyes appears a cozy bed with a pink canopy and a pile of toys. And it is unlikely that anyone will draw in their head the image of such a gloomy room where there is not a single plush toy. She once had a room like this, but now Courtney had everything to herself. The Duke claimed that to bathe in luxury, one must prove worthy of it and show how much she fits into the majestic Lode family. The girl was surprised because the young Sirius had been staring at her for a long time. He said that judging by her previous answers, it can be said that the lady clearly does not have a single brain cell. He remained silent for a moment and declared that the girl in front of him was absolutely useless. The boy noticed that neither his brother and sister, whom he had briefly seen, nor Herzlaut's eyes, did they shine with such a bright gold color as those of this girl. The boy wondered when, among all the people he had met there, she was the most unusual character. But she was the one who would do him no good. The Duke's family gathered to welcome their newcomer. He told the children that he would like to introduce them to a boy who came to see them today. He introduced his Imperial Majesty's younger brother, named Sirius Hyperion. The Duke informed them that His Majesty had asked to take over the education of His Highness Sirius, who would now study with them. All his children, except for little dark-haired Helena, began to compete to congratulate their father. But this was only because they wanted to become his successors. This boy was calm for a man who had been expelled from the imperial palace in the blink of an eye and found himself in the hands of the famous Duke and his crazy family. He thought so not because his eyes saw nothing, but because he could read other people's emotions. The golden eye, granted to the Duke of Loud, has the ability to read another person's emotions. The current Duke of Loud also used his ability and finally became the head of the family after fierce competition. He informed his children, as ordered by His Imperial Majesty, that they must follow the educational policy of the Loud family. He asked the young man if he had any objections, then from now on, he would become his teacher. The boy said that the Duke was now his teacher, so he no longer needed to be formal with him. The lady stepped forward and informed her father that they would do their best to help His Highness get used to this house as quickly as possible. The Duke looked intently at little Helena, who had kept her gaze lowered the entire time. The girl did not want to meet his eyes, because it was clear in his gaze that he considered this little one a pathetic nonentity. She heard this so often that she was already used to such an attitude. And the reason for the Duke's fierce hatred is that he inherited the golden eye, which has the powerful ability to visually see other people's emotions. Courtney loudly asked if her father had really entrusted her with another difficult task in the form of Sirius. She said that in the Loud Duchy, ranks are divided according to the order approved by the father and, according to what she heard, Sirius was assigned the lowest ranking room. Helena stood up and watched to see if Sirius would remain silent or say something to her. She was burning with curiosity, but at such times it is better to try not to stand out in the crowd. And the best she could do was sneak away from here while no one was looking. But as she approached the door, the little girl heard the sound of footsteps. Courtney stopped the children, who were about to leave, and glared at them menacingly. She screamed furiously that she hadn't finished speaking and that they must have listened to her to the end. Helena clearly sensed Courtney's emotions, who was furiously angry. Sirius said he didn't know if it was necessary to listen to her, and Courtney said she needed an ally to deal with her. She considered little Helena a piece of trash who wasn't even listed in any of the rankings. And she always called her a useless girl. My father always said that if he had the chance, he would like to tear her eyes out. So every time her father said that, it really seemed to her that he would keep them. Courtney asked if it turned out that His Highness Sirius would dine with Alina. The girl said that she could no longer watch this chaos, and that whenever the boy was told kindly, She must comply with the house rules. Sirius replied that he did not remember having allowed her to address him by his first name. And even the master received his permission. The boy asked who approved these rules she was constantly talking about. Helena was surprised. This boy easily wiped Courtney's nose clean, and if she made even a mistake now, she would be accused of insulting her father. Sirius took Alina's hand and told her he was tired, and it was better if everyone disappeared from sight. The girl didn't understand why Sirius was taking her with him, but they left the room together. One way or another, before that crazy pair of brother and sister ran out of the banquet hall. The girl needed to quickly return to her cozy attic room. But 20 minutes later, she realized that the boy was still following her. Elena asked him why he was following her, and her room was in a completely different direction. The young man showed that he did not understand why she was telling him this, and Elena did not expect such a reaction at all. It was difficult to imagine her companion Sirius acting this way, so the little lady decided to simply run away from him. The young man said he didn't say a word about you chasing her. Sirius suddenly approached one of the doors, which was located next to her room. And it turned out that the lowest-ranking room was naturally located next to hers. Sirius asked if the girl wanted to tell him anything else, as she was staring at him. She quickly wished him sweet dreams, ran to her room, and buried her face in the pillow. Elena was about to collapse on the floor from shame and didn't understand how it was possible to put a stranger in the room next door. Of course, Duke Laud did not treat her with such disdain at first, and she will remember the day of her birth, whose past life was cut short. There she read a novel whose main character is a man named Sirius Hyperion. And before she could finish reading it, she suddenly appeared in the world. The Duke of Laud turned out to be her father, and was known for his callousness and cold-bloodedness. Although Sirius was flawless and lived up to his role as the main character. The genre of the work was a mass-produced fantasy novel. The virtue required of the protagonist in such novels is the punishment of evil. But Sirius, staying true to his principles, destroyed everything in his path. And his goal was only to be the strongest in every sense of the word. And the families who wanted to draw him into their networks were wiped out. The Duke of Laud betrothed his fourth daughter to Sirius and was destroyed while trying to use him. However, being a master who turned his son into a real madman, the Duke was no more than a madman himself. He never looked at little Helena with a smile on his lips, but asked all his subordinates to provide her with the best so that she would have everything. Everything was too strange. And in the novel, he was a character who was later harsh with his children, but for some reason, he showed special affection for her. And this was the same touching story about how a sweet daughter is born to a tyrant father who heals the villain's wounded heart, transforming him beyond recognition. This is what the little girl thought until the day that very incident happened. An unknown white glow always emanated from my father, but for some reason that day, he was surrounded by a suffocating black haze. And until that day, her father had only shown her love, and she was sure that no trouble could arise between them in the future. Then the Duke squeezed her throat, and before losing consciousness, she barely managed to hear one phrase. Since she was born with the loud golden eye, she had to evade the attack, and after that day, it was her father's turn to conduct several more tests to test her ability. She was shocked by the ridiculous situation, and those perfect golden eyes really had no ability. She continued to cling to the Duke until she realized the true nature of her abilities. And Duke Laud had no warm feelings for her from the beginning. He only cared about the golden eyes she had become the owner of. And the essence of this family was truly terrible. But in any case, she believed that they would fall into the hands of Sirius, who would soon face all sorts of difficulties. However, she had long seen such bright lights that spoke of pure joy. That night, little Helena couldn't sleep, because she understood that Sirius was behind the wall. And she wondered what he was doing now. The girl put her ear to the wall and was only curious to know if he was a night owl like her. Or not. As expected, no sound was heard from his room, but suddenly Helena heard crying. She listened a little longer and clearly realized that the sound was coming from Sirius's room. Despite the Duke's pressure, he remained completely calm, and even Courtney did not anger him. And this boy was really crying in his room at night. Moreover, this crying was so loud that Alina heard it without even putting her ear to the wall. Alina understood that even if she felt discomfort in her heart, nothing could be done. And she needed to stick to her plan. However, Sirius was someone she could talk to normally for the first time in a long time. So it was probably worth trying to comfort him. But the girl knew that if a variable arose, the plot could be greatly distorted. Her plan was to do nothing and only be Sirius's shadow, so she needed to stop thinking about him quickly. And go to sleep. And his problems had nothing to do with her. The next day, Alina woke up not being herself, as she hadn't closed her eyes for a second during the night because of the remorse that had overcome her. Sirius was the main character of this novel and is capable of forging his own path better than anyone. Alina prepared for breakfast, but when she opened the door, she was very frightened to see this strange boy in front of her. She was so scared that she screamed involuntarily because Sirius was sitting right in front of her door. Alina was confused because he kept looking at her without saying a word. Alina thought the young man must have realized that she had heard him last night. But on the contrary, he was in a very good mood. Well, one way or another, before she was completely late, she urgently needed to go to the dining room for breakfast. The girl immediately walked forward quietly. And the strange thing was that the boy continued to follow her the whole time. Yesterday, due to the fear that had taken hold of her, she couldn't see Sirius clearly. But he really looked handsome and intelligent. Together they entered the hall, in which, as Alina expected, there was absolutely no one. And for a girl like her, it was her turn only when all other family members had finished eating. The girl smelled delicious tomato soup and was very happy to be able to start breakfast right away. But suddenly, Sirius took her hand and asked where she was going. Alina told him that she had to go to the kitchen every day and bring her own food. However, Sirius, being a member of the imperial family, never expressed his displeasure with such an attitude. The girl felt uncomfortable because Sirius was still staring at her and hadn't even touched the cutlery. There was no red glow on him, which means the boy was not angry. But it wasn't entirely clear what the problem was. Alina gathered her courage and decided to say something to the first boy and wished him bon appetit. The moment Sirius sat outside her room, he looked at her intently and immediately bowed as soon as they exchanged greetings. But as expected, his suggestion that he was waiting for her was just an illusion. And he was probably just waiting for her morning greeting. The girl noticed that Sirius had a very pretty face, and now, when the sunlight fell on his silver hair, he really looked like a fairy. However, don't forget that this humble Sirius is a little beast, a character who knows how to return what he receives, even if the enemy is his blood relative. He is not someone who clings to someone like an idiot. Alina was very curious to know why she heard him cry last night, but she knew she had to control her curiosity. The next day, Courtney was loudly shouting at someone in the estate's courtyard again, calling him a monster. Courtney's screams could be heard even on the second floor, and at that moment, Alina saw Sirius wielding a sword in the courtyard. Today was Sirius's first lesson as the Duke's student, so Alina deliberately chose such a good spot to observe the progress. She had absolutely nothing to do in this huge ducal castle. And throughout the day, no one initiated a conversation with the girl. And all because she had a peculiar position in this mansion. After the Duke stopped showering her with his love, everyone predicted her imminent death, because she had health problems since childhood. Therefore, it was unanimously decided to treat her like heir, because in this castle there were only people who hated her or ignored her. Helena could not miss such a fascinating sight. And this boy, with his entire appearance, proved that the Hyperion Empire's myth about the arrival of the wolf was the absolute truth. And most likely, it was not just a matter of enormous strength, but also of the fact that his field of vision is wider than others. And his intuition is like that of an animal. As Courtney said, it was hard to see him as a person, and many considered this little one already a monster. The Duke asked Sirius to stop and lower his sword. The Duke reported that the boy's movements were erratic and asked him to bring a special facility to practice fencing. Alina wondered if there was any reason to force Sirius to practice techniques on that structure. The Duke showed Sirius how this device worked, and at the same time demonstrated his excellent skills as an incredible swordsman. He showed in detail what the boy should do and asked him to start. With a strong and skillful strike, Sirius destroyed this structure, the fragments of which scattered in different directions. The structure looked much stronger and more massive than the wooden dummy he had smashed before. And Sirius seemed quite confused afterwards. The Duke approached him and declared threateningly that there was no room for ignorance here. After what she saw, Alina sat on the floor near the window, and her body completely stopped obeying her. She never expected something like this to happen in the first lesson, and if she had known, she would never have gone to see such a sight. Having been abused by the Duke of Laud for years, even being watched caused her indescribable horror. So, when she saw the Duke beating another person, she really wanted to run away from fear. Alina hoped the boy would be fine, and the book said Sirius didn't even flinch, regardless of the corporal punishment received from the Duke. The fear recently experienced by Alina slowly faded away, and she understood that from now on, she only had to worry about herself. Suddenly, she heard a sound coming from the next room and got the impression of seeing Sirius fall onto the bed with a groan. According to the novel, the Emperor even hinted to the Duke that he was willing to pay if he lived off Sirius's light. No more sounds came from the room, so Alina thought the boy immediately fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. Suddenly, she heard frightful gasps and moans coming directly from behind the wall. Alina decided this wouldn't do, and that if she continued at this rate, she would simply die. So we needed to help him as soon as possible. Sirius endures all the avatars of fate, and undoubtedly this will be his path. But now he was suffering a lot, and last time Alina had already ignored his cry once. Therefore, she couldn't stay away. Because due to these thoughts, she wouldn't be able to sleep that night again. It wasn't just that she had a guilty conscience, but she was sure that Sirius was her safety net. To be honest, the situation was a bit ridiculous, and she would have to secretly help Sirius. But there was nothing she could do. His life has been filled with revenge and the madness that accompanies it, but those who have taken care of Sirius since childhood knew that he was a deceiver. So Sirius is extremely suspicious of anyone who tries to help him. Of course, Alina had a reason to lend him a hand, but she couldn't just say that he was her safety net. Therefore, nothing terrible will happen if she looks a little behind her room door and finds out why he is screaming so much. If he is really sick, she will simply bring him medicine and leave. But what she saw frightened her immensely, because the boy was lying covered in blood on his bed, trembling all over. It seemed like he was asleep, and while sleeping, he cried a lot from terrible pain. He wasn't even able to respond, and if it weren't for the groans he occasionally let out, Alina would have thought he was dead. She felt that the boy had a high fever and needed to rush to get some medicine in her room. Although everyone in the castle treated her like invisible because she was often sick, there were some medicines in her room. Alina brought a bucket of water and a towel to relieve Sirius's intense fever. Previously, she would have behaved very carefully, fearing waking him up. But now she was sure he would never open his eyes in such a terrible state. She looked at him intently and found no words to describe this terrifying picture. In what condition was this innocent boy? She dipped the towel in water and gently wiped his face. Her heart was breaking with pain. Now he had to drink an antipyretic. Alina opened her mouth and poured the medicine into him. She whispered to Sirius that he only had to wait a little longer, and the temperature would soon drop. And the medicine would work. After a while, Alina succeeded. The boy's body cooled down and was no longer hot. Like boiling water, she had dealt with his fever and now needed to do something about the swollen hands where the wounds were. She applied an ointment to his hands, which was supposed to help with bruises. And bruises. Alina noticed that he had too many bruises and scratches and felt very sorry for this boy. She heard a silent sob and realized that Sirius was crying in his sleep because tears were streaming down his face onto the pillow. It was very hard for her to look at this child, and it was as if there was a heavy stone in her soul. She asked him why he was crying so much, and understood that they would not hear an answer from him now. The Sirius she knows has never been weak, not even at such a young age. And as evidence, we can use the fact that Sirius behaved decisively in a situation where there was frantic oppression all around. And now, being completely alone, Sirius could finally release his emotions. Sirius was the main character of the novel and also a mad boy, and when she saw the tears in his eyes, Elena felt like he was just a harmless child. She waited until his crying subsided, holding his hand the whole time and deciding to stay close to him a little longer. Elena returned to her room at the first light of day and woke up incredibly sleepy. She opened the door and saw Sirius, who looked surprisingly well considering his condition yesterday. The boy asked her why she left the room so late today, and the girl said she simply overslept. But she asked why Sirius suddenly asked that question, but the boy couldn't find anything to answer her. And he fell into thought. He called her quickly for breakfast and moved on, and as expected, and Elena understood. His attitude clearly could not be considered normal. All night he didn't open his eyes or show a single sign of having regained consciousness. If someone managed to notice her presence nearby in such a state, then it definitely shouldn't be a person. Despite his slightly uneven gait, he looked completely fine and, recalling his condition, Elena was simply glad that everything was fine with him. She was sure that everything was thanks to her tutoring, but the possibility that Sirius had a phenomenal ability to heal should not be excluded. They entered the dining room together and sat opposite each other at the large table again. On the way here, Elena was exhausted from excitement, but nothing special happened. And until that moment, they did not exchange a word. Sirius suddenly announced that when the girl finished eating, she should follow him. Elena was scared and didn't understand why the boy just said that. She followed him anyway and wanted to see where he would take her. He stopped in one place and asked her to wait there until he finished. Elena smiled and asked if she could wait for him somewhere else. She didn't know what might happen next, but it definitely didn't make her feel good. And she felt like she was on pins and needles. She had a feeling that her father could appear at any moment, and she would have to go back to the house. Elena sat comfortably on the grass near a huge tree, and it was very nice that Sirius allowed her to sit here. But his gaze was very strange when he gave her this permission. And that look was exactly the same as on the day of their first meeting, when he called her useless. Elena really enjoyed her new role, where she observed from the sidelines and finally had the chance to enjoy the process more. But unfortunately, the world was not as simple as it turned out, and if she continued to behave like last night, Sirius would start noticing her existence. The girl suddenly smelled blood, and when she looked up, she saw Sirius in front of her, standing covered in blood. She didn't feel when he managed to get so close, so she didn't expect to see him at all. She noticed that there were no wounds on his body, which meant the blood did not belong to him. The boy, as if nothing was happening, suddenly held out his hand to her and probably wanted her to take it. In the current situation, Elena couldn't dismiss him in any way, but she didn't understand at all what was happening to this strange boy. Sirius asked if her hand was too cold for her to hold it any longer. And when asked why he was trying to put it in her hand, he had to answer that he wanted to stroke his head with that hand. And this time, he really messed up. Of course, the great advantage was that her voice did not tremble and sounded confident, but the words spoken were clearly too much. Sirius smiled and said that in that case, she should quickly praise him and pat him on the head. Elena understood that the boy intended to be gentle and kind, but she believed that he couldn't fool her. She patted his head, but knew she should never have behaved like that. And since the person patting his head does not express displeasure, then everything is in perfect order. The boy said that no preparations had been made for the lesson, so he was assigned to fight a monster that was captured to train knights. Naturally, he instantly defeated this monster, killing it with a sharp sword. And Elena finally understood why this strange boy was covered in blood. Even without seeing the picture, Elena could easily imagine what it looked like. And this young Sirius probably fought like a beast. And now he stood in front of her and looked at her very strangely, as if wanting to ask her something. Suddenly, the young man stood up, and Alina wondered if he would simply take her and leave. He left without a word, but on the other hand, the long-awaited freedom had finally come for Alina. But anyway, she was glad that Sirius never asked about what happened last night. And it could be said that she had committed the perfect crime. But she lost sight of the fact that Sirius's capabilities are several times greater than a human's. And to the above, it is worth adding one fact: that the criminal always returns to the scene of the crime. And 30 minutes earlier, Alina was overcome by a wave of remorse. She managed to reconstruct a picture from conversations overheard between servants and maids. Sirius's chaotic ball skills began to improve rapidly under the tutelage of the Duke of Loud. And his innate spirit, along with his undeniable talent, could not go unnoticed. Everyone, without hesitation, called him a genius, and the Duke of Loud also began to take an interest in him. So Joseph, who used fencing as his main skill, was, justifiably, very nervous. It was in this situation that the Duke of Loud ordered Sirius and Joseph to fight each other. The man was very curious to see which of these boys would win. The expressed assumption that Joseph might lose to his opponent must have completely deprived him of his ability to think sensibly. So Joseph attacked Sirius before the countdown was complete. Although Sirius managed to block the attack with his sword, despite obvious rule violations, the Duke did not give the order to stop the fight. And Joseph's sharp sword touched Sirius's body, although the latter managed to dodge it in time. The match ended, and Joseph was informed that he would be punished for violating the rules. After this, the boy bandaged his wound himself, albeit extremely ineptly, because blood continued to run down his clothes. Although Alina had invaded his room with the best intentions, after secretly overhearing a conversation between two maids, she really didn't want to get involved in dangerous adventures. The girl cried while bandaging his wounds and said that the boy was going to take revenge on everything. Therefore, he should not have died here, because there are still many important things to do in his future life. Suddenly, Sirius stood up and took her hand, and Alina was very frightened. She did not expect him to wake up, and Sirius looked at her with a very penetrating gaze. Alina feared that her behavior could be dangerous, and she trembled in his touching eyes. He asked what that meant, but there wasn't a single appropriate excuse in her head. She wanted to try to escape from here, but the young man did not allow her, throwing her onto the bed. Fortunately, he turned so that the wound was not affected, but now they were too close to each other. She covered his eyes with her hands and shouted that she was only dreaming. The boy laughed cheerfully, not understanding why she was covering his eyes with her hands. She began to tell him words about sleep, which comes with the first rays of the sun. So the boy needed to fall asleep as soon as possible. She listened to him fall silent and was surprised, but Sirius actually closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep after that. But even if he regained consciousness for just a moment, he managed to see her face clearly. And as she thought, now she had no choice but to run away quickly. Although the ducal family was disgusting, as long as Helena was here, she at least had a roof over her head. And food. She saw that Sirius's condition had stabilized a bit, but he still looked very pale. And for the ducal family to collapse, Sirius first had to survive, so now she needed to do everything possible to make it happen. With her reckless actions, she attracted the attention of the main character, but fortunately she had a golden eye. And if other strange changes appear, she will immediately be the first to leave this house. Well, as Alina thought, not even a day had passed before Sirius began to behave even stranger than before. Since she had already planned her escape, she woke up and immediately began sorting through things with which she could earn money. But the only question was, who would buy medicine from a 10-year-old girl? The only good thing about the situation was that Sirius was not doing anything at the moment. So she had a little more free time. Therefore, Alina did not say at all that she had given up. She was just sure that she had a strong argument on her hands. Suddenly, she smelled blood just as she was about to go to breakfast. She opened the door and saw Sirius sitting on the windowsill, thick drops of blood dripping from his shoes onto the floor. She almost screamed in surprise because Sirius looked very strange. Judging by the puddles of blood in the hallway and the bloodstains on the bandages, it is safe to say that yesterday's incident was not a dream. But for some reason, Sirius was in such a good mood. The boy asked the girl to follow him, and she cautiously accepted his proposal. At most, she expected Sirius to look at her with contempt, but on the contrary, he looked her in the eyes with a radiant smile on his face. But he is probably just testing how brave she is, and maybe she should slow down and slip away right now. Elena understood that Sirius was constantly adapting to her pace, so she would have to follow him resignedly. The boy suddenly asked if the girl wanted to tell him something. She decided that she would stick to the original plan first and deny everything. So she changed the subject and asked Sirius if he was hungry. Otherwise, they had to hurry to breakfast so as not to be late. Elena went to the kitchen to get her ration of aromatic mushroom soup from the maids. But Sirius hurried to serve her this soup, and she didn't understand at all why he started treating her so carefully. They sat opposite each other, and Sirius politely wished her bon appetit. Elena wondered if he really thought what happened last night was a dream. But even if that were the case, she couldn't understand why he was becoming so friendly. Elena suddenly heard a knock on the door, and it was strange because until today, no one had entered the dining room during their meal. The maid brought Sirius certain dishes, which his lordship ordered prepared to contribute to a speedy recovery. In the Duke of Laud's residence, good quality food was the highest reward. And the fact that Sirius had the opportunity to try a special menu suggests that he might have gained the Duke's recognition and earn a reward. But if this is really the case, then the Duke should have sent him a doctor yesterday. Despite him being Helena's father, but in terms of callousness, no one can surpass him. Sirius took food from his plate and asked Helena to eat a piece. And apparently, he was going to watch her until she ate this piece of meat. It was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten in her entire life. And while chewing a delicious piece, Sirius said that he had dreamed of her yesterday. If you think about it, this wasn't the first time she had appeared to him in a dream. And in the previous dream, he even held her hand. Elena understood, went into the next room and took care of him so he wouldn't accidentally die. But seeing the tears in his eyes, she unconsciously took his hand. The girl fell silent, recalling this incident, and Sirius asked why she didn't answer him. Elena realized when she thought about it, it seemed like they had never spoken to Sirius for so long. She felt like everything would be fine, so she carefully asked what the dream in which she appeared to him was about. Sirius replied that it was just a good dream and thought about her words for a moment. Sirius decided. The expression on Elena's face seemed to indicate that she was not giving him a proper answer about her dream. Of course, at first the dream was like a nightmare, but in the end, Sirius got what he had wished for his whole life. On the day of his arrival at the Duchy of Laud, Sirius had a glimmer of hope because he had finally escaped the disgusting imperial palace. Until today, he was just the arrival of a wolf and a prince in name only, and it was absolutely true that he survived. With all his heart, he imagined a new life, which was getting closer every second. So that his soul was filled with the desire to live a normal life, like other children, who in the morning wonder if everyone slept well, play with their peers during the day. And at night they fall asleep peacefully in their beds, and if possible, the boy dreamed that someone would also wish him good night. This sincere, childish wish dissipated instantly like a mirage when he personally met the Duke of Laud. Sirius had already seen a similar look, so he immediately guessed what awaited him. And the imperial palace and the Duchy of Laud were all the same terrible nightmare. The Duke examined him with eyes like a snake looking at a toy, and the other family members were no different from him. And Sirius could not help but notice the subtle touch of hostility in those eyes. And in this case, it was for these reasons that the boy decided to respond to hostility with hostility. This is how he survived in the imperial palace, and most likely the same fate awaited him in this castle. And Sirius sadly thought that no matter where he went, there would be no change in his life. He should have understood immediately that the emperor would never send him to a place where there was a favorable atmosphere, and that he should not have entertained any illusions. And at that very moment, he was walking down the hallway, and a door opened in front of him, from which Helena, excited, flew out shouting for the first time. Sirius realized at that moment that he had met a girl who was completely different from others. This girl had golden eyes and looked more like a member of the Loud family than anyone else, despite her name being Alina. Immediately after their encounter, many interesting incidents occurred, especially this funny situation where she mistakenly thought she was being followed, and then she turned red as a beet. At that moment, continuing to drown in the notary's laughter, Sirius felt for the first time that he was having fun. But his face remained unchanged. Therefore, Alina, of course, could not guess anything, but that very beautiful evening she wished him good night. But for some reason, in that second, there was no trace of Sirius's joy. Not to say that his mood deteriorated, most likely he felt something akin to shock. As a result, he was surprised to see that one of his wishes, which he had decided to give up on, unexpectedly came true. And he probably shouldn't have remembered that moment when his eyes filled with tears. But he had never felt as weak as he did then. Alina didn't understand his behavior at all, but she wanted to believe that the boy treated her well. Until recently, he was in high spirits, but for some reason, a blue haze suddenly fell upon his shoulders, which indicates that Sirius had become depressed. Alina didn't understand if this happened because she was too reluctant to eat the food he gave her. Or there could be another reason. But whatever it was, she couldn't understand at all what this strange boy was thinking. Alina was in such a hurry to eat this piece that she accidentally choked with pleasure. Sirius was nearby and took her hand, watching as Alina began to cough heavily. The boy asked why she suddenly started coughing so much, if the girl was really in pain. His face looked worried, and he was really concerned about her now, and on Alina's part. It was even more surprising that the man who was wounded with a sword yesterday went to breakfast today as if nothing had happened. The boy said that the girl's health was very poor, but she laughed and replied that it was probably not far from average. Sirius suddenly drew attention to his bandaged wound, which almost didn't hurt anymore. The wound had almost healed, all thanks to the healing power that came from the wolf's blood. Therefore, the boy was surprised, and Alina felt very admired to be. But still trying to help him, Sirius remembered everything from the beginning. From the first night she helped him, he felt her presence and knew it was her. The boy understood that no one is kind for no reason, but Alina's sincerity was completely different. Sirius asked, "It seems the girl is in pain and needs to take medicine, of which there is plenty in her room." Alina was surprised how he knew about the medicine and decided that the first thing she had to do was escape from here to her room. Before leaving, Sirius asked if she wanted to see his first training session. Therefore, soon little Alina was again sitting in the courtyard, waiting for Sirius to train. She understood that she had done everything right, and even without knowing what Sirius was thinking, she was sure that her refusal would spoil his mood. He said it would be dangerous for Alina to be on the training ground, so he asked her to sit nearby. She had seen him train from afar, and now Sirius looked like an incredibly small boy. Suddenly, she heard approaching footsteps and saw Joseph approaching her. The girl was very scared when she saw him and asked why he was standing there. Joseph still considered Helena untouchable in this family, but it is unlikely he understands that even if his father acknowledges him, it's all useless. Alina noticed that Joseph was wearing a different uniform and most likely, as punishment for violating the rules of conduct, the Duke ordered him to work as a servant. The boy was indignant that Alina was looking at him, but the girl replied that she did not do such useless things. Shouted the young man. Alina doesn't even call him brother, and a little bug like her dares to ignore him. Joseph became very angry and warned that the little girl started openly ignoring him. Alina looked in his direction. Shouted Joseph, whom she stared at, but the one she was looking at was not him at all. Sirius was walking towards them. His eyes indicated that the boy was filled with rage and determination. Joseph was surprised and couldn't understand how this happened because the boy had just been on the training ground. Joseph had just scolded Alina for not treating him like an older brother, so she tried to reason with him like a younger sister. She wanted to say something to Sirius, but the boy threateningly told her that he did not allow her to speak to him in an informal tone. And if she has nothing else to say, then the young man should stop bothering him and disappear from his sight. Joseph wanted to wave his hand at him, but was stopped by the Duke's voice coming from behind him. The Duke saw Joseph hit Sirius and stopped the incident in an instant. It was the Duke of Laud himself, and he had just caught his son behaving inappropriately. He turned to Sirius, whom he ordered to rest today, but it turned out that the boy had not yet left the training ground. Elena had been haunted by some kind of premonition since morning, and thought that today would be the worst day of her life. Sirius told the Duke that he had decided to have a word with Joseph. And right now, the boy was trying to protect Elena, and it was all because of the Duke. He told Loud that he had also asked Joseph a question, but could not get an answer. So the conversation dragged on. The Duke of Loud still seemed extremely interested and wanted to know what the question was. He asked his son to try to explain to him what was what, but the boy only mumbled uncertainly in response. The Duke said he would judge for himself whether the question was trivial or not after hearing Joseph's answer. The son told him that Sirius asked to speak with him formally, and the Duke smiled sinisterly upon hearing these words. The Duke asked Joseph to follow him. Helena was not surprised that he didn't even mention her, and at that moment Sirius took her hand and told her it was time for them to leave here. Usually, when unexpectedly confronted by the Duke, Helena kept thinking about him incessantly. But now, she was more worried about the question of where Sirius was going. Elena felt that she was slowly beginning to calm down with Sirius, and perhaps it was because he was trying to help her. She was grateful to Sirius for his help, but thinking about the future, it was safe to say that it was a very bad sign. From the beginning, Elena made the firm decision to stay close to Sirius without attracting his attention. Sirius turned to the girl and asked if there was any interesting place she would like to go. He said confidently that he had a great idea that would answer her question. Judging by the relaxed expression on Sirius's face, he felt comfortable with Elena. So he began to behave with greater freedom. She said she loved reading books, but nevertheless, this was an unacceptable situation for her. By staying close to Sirius, she could get drawn into the whirlwind of the next events. Elena had to somehow distance herself from him, so she said that the process of choosing a book took her a long time. And she hoped the boy would leave now. Sirius looked very cute when he was a little annoyed by this answer, but Elena was sure that she needed to be firm. He asked if he could wait for her outside, and the girl herself didn't understand how he answered her question with consent. Elena understood that since Sirius was fine now, it meant everything would be fine for her for now. And looking at his sweet, angelic face, she felt that she had done the right thing by giving him her permission. As soon as he closed the door, she immediately clutched her head with cries of indignation. Because she had a weakness for such cute faces. Elena understood that she alone was to blame for what had happened, and now she needed to sort out her thoughts about Sirius. Because now he seemed incredibly charming and cute with his pretty face. But later, this sweet boy will grow up and brutally deal with the entire empire. Elena knew she had to be vigilant, and even despite the murder of so many fiancés, Sirius could get engaged again without any problem. And although the girls still doubted his intentions, any of them could refuse the engagement. But they were fascinated by his appearance. Another woman who approached Sirius to kill him, at the decisive moment, could not pierce his heart with her dagger. Subsequently, Sirius's hand didn't even tremble, and he killed her mercilessly. And to summarize, we can say that Sirius was distinguished by dazzling beauty throughout his life. However, the book never said anything about how cute he was, and the novel simply used Sirius's childhood as a springboard to set future events in a better light. His appearance as a child, buried under the weight of adversity and suffering, did not fit his sweet description in any way. Elena slowly chose a book for herself, and it saddened her to think that the boy was still waiting for her at the library door. She decided to open the door a little and check whether he had left or not, but Joseph's voice stopped her. Elena didn't know what happened after his father took him away, but one thing she was very clear about. The boy was in a disgusting mood now. There were those in this family who found Alina's lifestyle ridiculous and didn't give themselves a chance to mock her. And most of the time, this is exactly what Joseph did. Therefore, she was sure that nothing good could be expected from meeting him. And she needed to leave here as soon as possible. Joseph handed her something and asked her to give it to Sirius and add that it was from the Duke of Loud. Alina asked what it was, and the boy became indignant because she dared to insert her words into his monologue. She sharply turned the thing that was wrapped in a rag, but at that moment, his base was saved by Sirius. And it really was him, although Alina was sure that the boy had already left. Sirius apologized because she said to wait for him outside, but Alina tried to assure him that there was no need to apologize for anything. She felt a slight remorse for making him wait so long. But suddenly, the boy asked her to wait aside. Alina handed the item to Sirius, and Joseph declared that she followed his orders as instructed. Sirius asked if the young man was really going to leave after throwing that thing at Alina. Joseph shouted that he should really apologize to this pathetic girl. But Sirius's piercing gaze meant only one thing. Joseph would not get away with a simple apology this time. Sirius stared intently at Joseph, who was next to him, and expected some kind of reaction from the boy. Then he hit Joseph with all his might, so much so that he even flew off in the other direction. He hit him so hard that the young man flew into a bookshelf, and they piled up on his head. There were sparks of fire in Sirius's eyes as his blood boiled from the perfect punishment. Joseph shouted, wondering if the boy had hit him for something trivial. Sirius replied that he did not expect the young man to be able to stand firm, and that he would certainly continue to show excellent endurance. Joseph decided to show the boy where his place was and waved his hand, but he skillfully stopped it. It was incredible, but Joseph couldn't move a finger, and Sirius was indeed much stronger than him. The boy continued to hold him, and Joseph felt like his wrist was about to be crushed. With a swing of his hand, he threw Joseph, who fell onto a pile of scattered books. Sirius noticed that the same vile smile had finally disappeared from Joseph's face. And due to his impudence, the boy had almost caused Helena a serious injury. Sirius was very indignant that this vile boy dared to lay a hand on his only good person. Therefore, he stood by his side and still asked him to think about his offense. Joseph asked if he could apologize to Helen to make amends. Words can be used to form phrases, but Sirius was sure that there was no power in them to force someone to act in a certain way or another. He learned this knowledge through personal experience. During the years Sirius spent in the Imperial Palace, he really wanted to solve it himself. But he decided it would be right to hear Alina's opinion on this matter. He turned to the girl, but noticed with horror that the girl was trembling with fear and shaking while clutching her head. Alina didn't understand how you could remain calm in a situation where someone was fighting right in front of your nose. A moment ago, while watching Sirius with his sweet face hitting Joseph, she felt like she was in a popular novel where all events led to destruction. Sirius approached Alina and touched her head, saying she didn't have a fever, but that the girl's hands were very cold. Alina said she was fine and that her health had nothing to do with it, just that she was a little scared. Sirius declared that she was too weak and suddenly grabbed her over his shoulders so she wouldn't strain herself walking in that state. The girl had no idea why Sirius suddenly changed his attitude towards her. But in this position, she felt the warmth of his embrace, and she really liked that feeling. After he carried her to the room, Alina said that she hadn't had time to thank him for his help before. Sirius replied that seeing the color return to her cheeks, he was now convinced that she was really just scared. The boy asked what to do with Joseph, and the girl replied that it wasn't about whether she wanted him punished or not, she just thought he had already been punished enough. She was about to go to her room, but Sirius said he had come up with the best way to solve the problem, and that she needed to follow him urgently. He announced that they would go to the master because he was going to tell him about them. Sirius extended his hand to her and told her that if the girl was scared, then she could take his hand. And he perfectly understood her fear, but he was sure she could trust him. Alina had no idea what Sirius was doing, but she accepted and went with him to the Duke. She was already regretting her answer, but instead of leaving him to simmer alone, it was better to simmer with him and keep an eye on what would happen. This afternoon, the Duke was in his office with his daughter Courtney. He already knew what happened, and Courtney confirmed that Sirius hit Joseph. But the man was only worried about the fact that his son failed to defend himself from a single blow, and simply wasted all this time training his son in vain. Courtney thought she could feel no fear, and only by enduring all these sparks flying everywhere, she could get the position of successor. She wanted to take this place of honor and gain the right of the head of the family to oppress and humiliate anyone who dared to utter a word in her direction. The Duke said that among everyone he had ever met in life, Sirius had the most outstanding qualities. Until now, even despite the ability of the Golden Eye, the ducal family was subordinate to the imperial house of Hyperion. Even if all family members know how to read human emotions, overthrowing the Hyperion family, where demigods are periodically born, is not an easy task. However, no one who inherited wolf blood has appeared for a long time, so the solid foundation under the feet of the Hyperion family began to crack. And even Sirius is now subordinate to the Loud family. And the Duke understood that a more ideal moment could not be imagined. And the easiest way to achieve this goal is marriage, and the Duke just happened to have 2 daughters. At the time of his conversation with Courtney, a maid approached the Duke and told him that His Highness Sirius and Lady Alina were requesting an audience with him. The man thought this happened at the perfect moment, and if Alina had come, he would have rejected her. He told Courtney she could go, and the girl also wanted to know what would happen here now. Courtney headed towards the exit and saw the butler entering the Duke's office with the children. She decided for herself that she would definitely find out later why these 2 had come here. Sirius greeted the master loudly, and Helena timidly greeted her father. As expected, there was not a drop of fear in Sirius's gaze, and Helena didn't even see a cloud of emotion. Unlike Sirius, who simply didn't show his emotions, Helena was the only girl with whom the Duke's abilities didn't work. There was a time when he thought she was special because it was impossible to read her. But now it was infinitely unpleasant for him to look at this girl. Sirius said he had come to receive a reward because something he really wanted had appeared. It was a reward for Sirius showing up, for training one day despite being seriously injured the day before. He said he would like to study with Alina, and for him, this will be the reward he wants to receive. From the beginning, the Duke found it strange that they were holding hands. But Sirius had probably found someone to get close to in the Duke's residence. Just a couple of minutes ago, he had thought about tying Sirius down as a consequence of marriage. But he never expected him to take the first step himself. The Duke was sure that Helena, whom he thought would be useless, finally had a chance to do at least something for the good of the family. Otherwise, the murder of Helena's true father will be meaningless. 10 years ago, the Duke of Laut was standing in front of an exhausted prisoner who was under custody. He then noticed that for someone who couldn't sit up and speak normally, this prisoner's gaze was too tenacious. And Laut did not like it at all. Lanus Laud and Hugo Laud were twins, and their faces were similar enough to be mistaken for the same person. However, no one ever confused them. Hugo never smiled, while his brother could always be seen with a warm smile on his lips. And at that moment, he was not looking at him, as if ready to devour him, as happened later. He imprisoned his brother, and did so solely for his own purposes. He insisted that his brother should have understood something a long time ago, and realized what was happening. That day, he told him that a few minutes ago his daughter was born. He asked his brother to name her Elena, and it was a mutual decision between him and Stacy. All members of the Loud family, except the heir, were forbidden to continue the family tree in one word. It was impossible to create a collateral line. However, Lanus fell in love with Stacy, a maid born into a ruined aristocratic family, and thereby broke the most important rule of the Load family and ran away. After all, it was clear that the current Duke, who knows no mercy, would certainly punish the culprits with death. The reason they could be located and captured was because Stacy was pregnant and could not escape properly. Hugo came up with a very effective method to get rid of his rival, threatening to kill Linus if Stacy tried to escape. He forced her, carrying a child under her heart, to stay in the Lode residence so that Linus would never try to escape again. After the news of his daughter's birth, the first thing Linus did was ask his brother if everything was fine with Stacy. He replied that she seemed quite healthy after the child's birth. Stacy gave birth to her daughter safely and was completely healthy, and this happened at the same time the report arrived that her daughter was born with perfect golden eyes. Hugo said he had a proposal for his brother and offered to let his daughter live. He promised to raise her as his own from now on, so that no one would know that she belonged to a side branch. But in that case, his brother would have to die. It was clear to everyone that the father would do everything possible for his son's happiness. So Linus accepted his conditions. Hugo noticed that his brother did not hesitate for a second in his choice, so he dealt with him as quickly as the young man gave an affirmative answer to his death. Thus, Helen became the daughter of the Duke of Loud and was a child of brilliant and perfect golden eyes. In the 7-year history before Helena, there was another person with the same eyes. And the family chronicles said that he could see more than just emotions. A person with perfect golden eyes is born knowing what will happen in the future. And if this story is true, then the golden eye ability is truly great. Therefore, the Duke constantly monitored the girl, but even during numerous attempts to kill Helena, she could never predict the danger. The man thought, it seems that the words that the ideal golden eye is capable of seeing the future are complete nonsense. However, to his great surprise, Helena somehow managed to fall into Sirius's soul. 10 years had passed since he killed his older brother and took Helena into his hands. And finally, the Duke could say that the murder of Linus was not in vain. This morning, little Helena opened her eyes, and it seemed like she was dreaming of something. But she remembered nothing. Judging by the fact that she even cried in her sleep, it seems that he was very sad. But the girl's head was completely empty. Yesterday, when Sirius asked to study with her, Elena felt some discomfort, but at the same time, she was completely satisfied with this arrangement. Sirius said he needed to confess something, and that the girl should listen to him carefully. Elena pointed out that the boy wanted to share some secret with her, and he admitted in a whisper that he actually didn't know how to read. Sirius said that he considers this his weakness, so he does not stutter about his illiteracy again. Elena wondered why the boy so openly admitted his weakness to her, which he was afraid to tell others. Sirius looked at her and asked Elena to teach him to read before the teachers he called the teacher arrived. She could not refuse this request, and on top of everything, they now had to study secretly in his room. Elena decided to quickly teach him to read and no longer show any interest in him. He seriously said that since she is teaching him reading and writing today, the girl should be called teacher. And he cannot use formal language in a conversation. The boy asked what about this option so that the two of them would stop using formal speech. And this would probably be a more convenient way to communicate. From his expression, it could be seen that he no longer intended to make concessions. So the girl agreed to go to a personal level with him. Long hours were spent studying the material, and the sun had almost set, so Elena suggested they stop at what they had studied today. As expected of the protagonist of a novel, he had developed a genius mind. So today's lesson was more productive than she expected. Elena was very concerned about wanting to ask him a question, but if she didn't do it now, there would be no more opportunities to express it. The girl suddenly asked why Sirius suddenly started treating her so well. Sirius replied, because she treats him very well and he knows absolutely everything. In the original story, Sirius always looked suspiciously at those who treated him well. And this time, she was the exception to the rule. Elena tried not to think about it now, and it was much more important to devise an additional action plan. Sirius took a pile of books, and despite the chaotic teaching, Elena was glad she could learn something. And he decided to study the material himself. Sirius answered unexpectedly. In fact, the girl taught him very hard, and she also has desire. And will. And if in the future she finds a suitable role for herself, she will be able to become a useful person. Sirius had read that useless people had no choice but to die quickly. So in order to survive, he had to be useful. Elena felt a little comfortable with him, so she let her guard down for a moment, as expected. And Sirius was still human at that moment. He said that the girl could also do this, so he asked the teacher to allow them to study together. He collected his pile of books and said goodbye to Elena until classes started tomorrow. By spending a lot of time with Sirius, Elena managed to firmly grasp one important thing. Sirius does some cute things sometimes, but as expected from the novel, he is a complete lunatic. If things continued at this pace, her life would turn into a giant ferry, dragged by the waves. But if Sirius's attitude lately was any indication, it seemed that he considered her an ally. Recently, Sirius told her to be useful, and in that case, there was only one answer. She needed to give up that she was useless. Helena Bibla is sure that if she is a complete mediocrity, Sirius will be the first to abandon her. She thought that her new plan could be considered ideal, and that day Sirius invited her to play house. As expected, Sirius was bewildered, no matter how you looked at it. Mentally, he was clearly not a 10-year-old boy, and he definitely wouldn't be able to endure such games. Suddenly, the boy asked what the mother-daughter game was, and Elena was surprised, because he himself had just proposed it. Elena told him the details of the game, and Sirius suddenly said he didn't want to fight with her in new roles. And every time the maids gossiped, the conversation often revolved around spousal fights. The girl said they would play in an ideal family, where spouses treat each other with respect. So Sirius must not forget to use the word you. The children divided the roles, and the boy had to pretend he was returning home in the role of spouse. It turned out that the boy didn't know how to play at all, so he was completely confused. At this rate, Elena expected phenomenal success, so with a happy smile she asked if her dear husband had returned home. But Sirius opened his eyes and was very surprised when he heard the words she called him with. For some reason, Elena had the strange feeling that she had forgotten something. And it seemed like everything was going too well. She put some fake food on the paper and told him that today they would have a family dinner. After toy lunch, they lay down together and closed their eyes, and Elena announced that it was time to sleep. The boy greatly regretted that after opening his eyes, the mother-daughter game ended. Therefore, before closing his eyes, he told his dear wife that he would also like to play mother-daughter tomorrow. But then, Elena suddenly remembered that this cute boy was going to kill more than 10 of her fiancés in the future. Sirius lay with his eyes closed and suddenly said that for some reason he felt very good. And Elena decided that from tomorrow, the mother-daughter game would be forbidden. That same day, Helen was informed that her brother Joseph had regained consciousness. Her original plan for today was to learn how to play with Sirius, like yesterday, but suddenly the Duke called her. She went to Joseph's room and saw the boy lying in his bed. And indeed, everything turned out to be much worse than she thought. Elena said she came to receive his apology, and before he demanded that she behave like a younger sister. So now she came to reprimand him like a younger sister. After that incident, she learned that what Joseph gave Sirius that day was a real sword. Inherited personally from his father, so Joseph was consumed by envy. And he became furious. For his own good, it would be better for Joseph to offer a sincere apology, as Sirius would clearly notice that the apology was just for show. Joseph asked if he sincerely apologized and received forgiveness if Sirius would leave him alone. Elena always thought she was a little girl, but now Joseph looked very scared. And for the first time realized that in front of her, there was only a boy. And above all, he feared that after all this, the Duke might kick him out as unnecessary. Elena decided to help her brother, but in response only heard from him an insult towards Sirius. And the girl loudly declared that the boy was deeply mistaken, and that he did all this only for the sake of his beloved. Elena understood that if she ruined someone else's life for something like that, it would leave a bad aftertaste in her soul. Therefore, she asked somehow to watch the boy's language and be careful in her actions. After dealing with Joseph, it was now Sirius's turn. He found the boy in the courtyard, and at that moment, he was writing his name in the sand with a stick. Elena noticed that Sirius looked very happy, but at one point, he unexpectedly approached and kissed her on the cheek. The boy smiled and asked what Elena would like to play today, because a good day awaited him. Elena suggested that they observe the ants instead of playing mother and daughter. And this time, she was determined to act according to the plan. The mother-daughter play plan failed because Sirius was having fun. So this time she chose the least meaningful game. They found a huge anthill full of big and small ants. Sirius admitted that at first he thought watching ants would be boring. But it turned out to be quite an interesting activity. Elena understood that she would not move forward, and at this rate would suffer another failure, so she first needed to quickly change the subject. She asked why the Duke had called him, and the young man said that the teacher had informed him that she would be leaving for the capital for a few days, and was already looking for a tutor for her. In any case, Elena successfully changed the subject and now thought they could go back. Elena suggested returning home, and the young man said that this forest was really huge. But he thought that in front of him, there was only a small forest inside the garden. Elena said she had heard that this forest was over 200 years old, but the idea of entering it had never occurred to her. And look around. She noticed a tree that was shining especially brightly and invited Sirius to approach. She touched the tree, and in its hollow she found a pendant that someone must have hidden there. Although the pendant was rusty, its lock gave way and it opened easily. And the children saw inside a photograph of a blonde girl with green eyes, and with her name writ. Inside the pendant, in small letters, it read love. Stacy and Elena's face changed when she read the name. Elena suddenly ran forward and said she knew that name. Sirius asked why she started running and what happened. The Hyperion Empire worships the imperial family like gods, and they are believed to be living myths in their own veins, with divine blood flowing through their veins. The children unexpectedly found themselves in the family cemetery, and Helena confidently approached one of the tombstones on which this name was written. The current Duke of Loud only had one wife, and she died shortly after the birth of his sixth child. So everyone nicknamed Helen an illegitimate daughter. This is because even without knowing who Helena's mother was, one thing was certain. Elena is not the daughter of the Duchess of Loud. Elena also remembers the rumors exchanged between the maids at the time when the Duke of Loud was flirting with a maid named Stacy. It was speculated that because the maid had the same green eyes as the Duchess, she attracted the Duke's attention. Elena said she wondered if her mother had relatives, but at that moment, her father said she was an orphan. That conversation happened too long ago, so Elena did not remember the details of the emotions surrounding her father. Sirius pointed his finger at her and said they were very similar, and that this girl was actually her mother. Elena put on the pendant and proudly declared that this girl was actually her mother. And she felt like everything was going that way. Elena was worried. If you think about it, Sirius also knows nothing about his mother. And if she can be so happy in his presence, Elena shared with him that when she leaves the castle, she will go in search of her mother. But at this moment, Elena could not put her plan into action because the Duke had not yet given up on her golden eyes. But someday, she would definitely get out of here. Sirius suddenly announced that he would definitely help her do this. And in response, the girl smiled sweetly. A few days later, the father returned from the trip, and before meeting him, Elena gasped, although she knew that he would gather all the children. But she never expected her to be called too, because none of this had happened recently. Courtney was very upset because Sirius and Elena were also close to them. The Duke said that all subjects would be taught by Viscount Dalton and that classes would start tomorrow. So the two of them should visit the teacher and greet him. The Duke declared that the meeting was over and everyone could be free except Helena. And being left alone with the Duke, Helena was so scared that she couldn't even raise her head and look him in the eyes. The Duke affirmed that he knew the girl had gone through a lot of hardship and that from now on he would return what she should have enjoyed. He ruffled the girl's hair and suddenly announced that it was time for her to return to the main building of the residence. It was similar to what she had already encountered in childhood, to those moments when Alina believed that her father loved her. The Duke said she could walk now, and the girl carefully backed away. And after the man let her go, she rushed out of this office. But the man was sure that Alina was just a little girl who still had no one to trust in this world. And in the end, she would still recognize him, desire him now, and tremble with fear. And above all, because she truly considers Hugo her real father. Therefore, the Duke was confident that, naturally, everything would turn out exactly as he wished. That night, little Alina tossed and turned in her bed and couldn't sleep in her new room. She thought probably the Duke expected that if she showed a little kindness towards her, she would throw herself on his neck with tears of joy in her eyes. As expected, the Loud Duchy is a place where family members can only recover if they are on the verge of death. Therefore, as long as people with golden eyes continue to be born into a family, this family will not be able to escape. But one day Sirius will definitely put an end to everything, and at the same time, he will be salvation for the Louds. Therefore, Helena decided to go out into the hallway and saw that the light was on in one of the rooms. And Sirius was clearly in the room. There was actually a boy sitting at the table, quietly drinking warm milk from a cup. Sirius smiled and said that this nightgown suited Helena very well and that she looked very cute in it. Although this cute nightgown suited Helena very well, she should not have received it from the Duke. And every act of kindness has a reason, especially when the attention is focused on him. The young man was glad that Helena looked cautiously at the Duke's benevolent attitude. But when she first saw him, he seemed fierce to her. Sirius thought for a moment, and only woke up when Helena tried to find out from him if he had been listening to her this whole time. He repeated once more that classes with a tutor would start tomorrow, and asked if she was worried about studying. The boy thought for a while, and replied that he didn't even know what sensations he was experiencing. And at the thought of attending classes together, he looks forward to the next day. Alina thought she was worrying in vain, and that she would first have to fail all the tests the tutor would give them for her plan to succeed. Sirius asked her if she would like to sleep together on the living room sofa, as she probably didn't want to sleep in her new bed either. Just like him, Alina shyly replied that she didn't like the silence that reigned there. And Sirius was incredibly right. They brought a blanket and pillows to the living room and lay down on the floor, looking at the glass ceiling through which the stars could be seen. Alina thought about it. To be honest, she had never been on a hike in her life, and the night sky looks even more beautiful in real life. Sirius turned to her and asked when tomorrow would come. They could try to set up a real camp right outside. And it will be great because they will be able to play together again. Until now, all of Alina's thoughts were occupied only with worries about tomorrow's choice and the plan for future actions, but suddenly she had a feeling that she didn't need this plan. And she decided to find out if this boy would leave her, even if she became useless to him. Time passed quickly, and a whole 4 years had already passed, and the attractive Alina promised Sirius that they would spend this special day together. The boys had matured incredibly, and Sirius had become a teenager with perfect features. And cute. But even after many years, they still wanted to spend time together. 4 years ago, after the Duke suddenly changed his attitude, she was able to live as the Duke's daughter again. And all of Helen's wishes came true with a snap of a finger. Moreover, the Duke again treated her kindly, and those few years when she was abandoned by everyone seemed never to have existed. Moreover, he once even said that she was his only favorite daughter. But her emotions could be described in one phrase that was incredibly boring. The Duke set certain meal times for the two of them, and this made Helen feel extremely uncomfortable. She noticed Sirius's annoyed face, who for some reason didn't even look in her direction that day. The lady tried to explain to Sirius that nothing special had happened, and the Duke only asked how she was. By the way, Sirius had grown a lot, and even the beginnings of his transformation into an incredibly handsome man were visible on his face. Moreover, the boy had grown a lot and was already a head taller than Helena, and she said she had no idea when he managed to become such a big man. Because at the first meeting, he was shorter than her. A serious incident occurred that day, which almost cost them both their lives, so Alina will never be able to forget what happened. One day, while they were measuring their height, Alina noticed that their eyes were now at the same level. That day, a maid approached them and told them she would leave the delicacy with the tea. And she would leave immediately. She said her name was Gina, and that she had been serving Viscount Dalton since he moved to the capital. Alina thought the Viscount only came to the residence, but the tutor never said anything. Sirius wanted to take something from the table, but the girl told him not to touch anything with his hands. That day, unknowingly, she helped Sirius because she was sure that this maid was an assassin whose target was Sirius. Because she felt strong hostility from her that could not be confused with anything. She suggested that the cookies might be poisoned and that the Emperor had sent them to him. And as soon as she thought of it, her hand involuntarily hit Sirius's hand, with which he wanted to take something from the table. If the accidentally ingested food turned out to be poisoned, Sirius, overcoming the pain, tried to find a safe place and temporarily hide there. Temporarily. However, the Emperor's joke this time was too audacious. And the boy said that if they left the room as if nothing had happened, the maid would suspect something was wrong. Sirius asked if he and Alina were on the same page or on the same side, and if he could trust her. He asked the girl to trust him and promised that he would never let his follower get hurt. Alina wanted to trust the boy, but whatever they say, he was a killer, and her thoughts were still confused by fear. She remembered that Sirius had settled in the loud ducal residence and had been on the verge of death many times because of the assassins sent by the Emperor. But one thing she knew for sure. At that moment, there was no one to stop Sirius, and he ate 3 cookies. And being in a semi-stupefied state, he thought about how to survive, so this time Alina suggested holding hands and start acting together. The girl understood that she was in trouble because now there were significant discrepancies in the novel. Then Sirius suggested that she hide a couple of cookies, as if they had eaten them. And he himself promised to bring along toys that had a similar configuration. Alina thought, so as not to be a hindrance, she should at least do what he asks. Alina hid the cookies, and Sirius brought a large toy bear, which was supposed to be its replacement. They came up with a story about how they suddenly started feeling sleepy due to sleeping pills. So at first they had to hide inside. Sirius was going to take advantage of the moment and leave the closet first, and Alina suggested staying there until he called her. And after a while, the same maid entered the dining room, in whose hands was a huge kitchen knife. The lights in the dining room were off, but from the sounds coming from Alina, it was clear that the battle was in full swing. She felt a clear murderous intent, and this emotion definitely belonged to 2 people. But it was strange, because the 2 fogs were intertwined with each other, and it was as if they were fighting. Like their owners. Suddenly, the fog disappeared, and the sound stopped. So Alina decided to stick her head out of the closet a little, but unnoticed. But as soon as she opened the closet, she saw Sirius in front of her, who had been standing near the door this whole time. The girl screamed loudly that he scared her, because he moved too silently. She saw that everything in the room was upside down, but nowhere did she see the maid who intended to kill them. Sirius said that she fell out the window, and that most likely the assassin was already dead. But Alina clearly felt that the boy was now blatantly lying, and that everything had happened completely wrong. The blood stains on the floor indicated that she had not died from a fall from a height. And it was here that Sirius struck the fatal blow. Everyone knew Sirius's strength, and Alina did not understand why he would lie to her face. She took his hand and told him that the boy did the right thing and that he was a very good guy. To think that such a small boy could kill someone, and it was a terrible sight. But on the other hand, no one can blame Sirius for what happened. The little lady smiled and said she was very happy that Sirius had protected her again. She asked if the boy was very scared, and suddenly he rushed to hug her. He said he was very scared, and Alina realized how scared Sirius was. Then Sirius called her by her name. And at that moment, he wanted to tell her the 3 most important words. Years later, Alina remembered this and was surprised that they even had the chance to be in such a situation. Alina asked if Sirius was still in a bad mood with her, claiming that there really hadn't been conversations between her and her father. Sirius had continued to build a wall between them lately, but today he was being particularly sarcastic. Alina said that she too could get angry and have fun alone, while the young man coldly turned his back on her. After her words, Sirius thought that at this rate, he might really go crazy from everything that was happening between them. Every time Alina did something like that, he felt his sanity leaving him. Sirius perfectly knew what was happening to him, but preferred to remain ignorant. He was sure that she would never reciprocate his feelings, and it would be better if he didn't understand what was happening. The Duchy of Lode was a vast and rich territory, with many high-quality magic stones that were an important source of income for the Lode family. However, the family had to deal with the monsters that infested the duchy every winter. So Sirius also began to participate in expeditions from the first year of his arrival at the residence. Punitive expeditions against monsters were on a different level from fighting individual monsters. So to see a clear example of the hunting process, the Duke ordered the boy to follow the punitive squad. And of course, he did not miss the opportunity to proudly demonstrate his skills. The information Sirius received that day was a simple mission. And after one of these missions, he was waiting for Alina near the gate, who was about to leave. Alina said she borrowed his house suit because she had nothing to wear, and probably looked strange in his clothes. Alina was very happy and eagerly awaited their joint outing. After meeting the girl, Sirius felt that something was wrong with him due to strange sensations. Recently, Alina said that she would not like to wear a dress, but an outfit that would not restrict movement. Therefore, he lent her his clothes. At that moment, everything was as usual. But after seeing her dressed, for some reason he began to behave differently. He couldn't take his eyes off her, and his cheeks flushed with a burning blush. Alina was happy and very excited. She said she didn't even remember the last time she went out to such a place. And in fact, the Duke of Loud had strictly forbidden Alina from leaving the residence a long time ago. Alina said the young man couldn't even imagine how surprised she felt when he told her that he had received permission from his father for her to go outside. It seems that Alina herself did not know the reason for her imprisonment, but she hoped to receive an answer to her questions someday. But no matter how much the Duke tried to pretend to be a loving father, Helena could not be fooled. It was good that Sirius was the first to speak well of her, but even he could not think that the Duke would actually agree. This question was not that important, and the most important thing is that Helena was now incredibly happy with her long-awaited trip. She stood near the harnessed horses, and the coachman said they would depart at any moment. Sirius was heading towards them and declared that he was completely ready to leave. He really hoped that everything would be fine, and the main gates of the estate finally opened before him. And Helena, who were sitting on horseback. One of the knights asked if His Highness Sirius was ready to travel with his companion. And Sirius confidently declared that they were ready to hit the road, while inspired Helena turned her head in different directions. He asked the girl to focus on controlling the horses so she wouldn't have trouble keeping up with them. And he told her that today they would go to explore Mount Binks and return before sunset. Every member of the expedition was notified in advance that Alina would participate in this journey. So everyone looked at her with curiosity. But for some reason, this whole ridiculous situation made Sirius feel extremely displeased. Sirius informed the knights that they were not going for a pleasure ride, so they should stop saying all sorts of nonsense. The young man was sure that a warning would be enough, and that a more organized atmosphere would not hurt during this mission. However, the atmosphere was much better than Sirius had expected. The weather was warm. And it felt like they were at a picnic, so this atmosphere would definitely bring good memories to Alina. The knights warned Lord Sirius that it was starting to rain, and that it would probably rain for a long time. The young man told Helena that the weather had worsened sooner than he thought, so it would be better if they returned. He asked Sir Keel to escort Helena to the castle, asked the others to follow him, and he said they would return after completing their reconnaissance mission. Sirius was sure that one person was enough to protect himself, because for several decades, not a single monster had been discovered in this area. But suddenly, he told everyone to stop moving and stand still. Some unusual sound clearly reached Sirius's ears, so he ordered everyone to spread out around the perimeter. And wait. He asked Helena to approach him so he could ensure her complete safety. The young man helped her onto his horse and sat behind her so he could be close on the way. Sirius ordered all the knights at a signal to scatter in different directions and clear the paths. Suddenly, in the spot the knights had vacated, a huge green monster appeared. And the horse, along with Sirius and Helena, reared up. As expected, the sound Sirius heard earlier was the groaning of the earth due to the monster in its depths. Sirius understood that he needed to find the monster's weak spot to defeat it instantly. The young man decided to try throwing the sword and finishing it off in one blow, and it shouldn't be so difficult. But the problem was that Sirius needed to release the reins or Helena to draw the sword. And he understood that he would only have one attempt to destroy the monster in one blow. He told Helena to hug him tightly to hope that everything would be fine. But the unexpected Helena could not stay on the horse, and Sirius managed to grab her. After which they fell off the horse and rolled downhill. The knights saw them fall and they landed on the ground, hugging tightly. Sirius was the first to come to his senses, and he started shaking Helena to wake her up. And be okay. After his words, the girl woke up quickly, and it seems she only slightly injured her head when she fell. Sirius wondered why everything turned out this way, because when they started the expedition, he couldn't even imagine something like this. He was very upset because he really wanted to give Alina a day full of good memories. But Alina smiled and said that he had been by her side the whole time and there was no need to worry. She offered him her hand and told him that they should quickly take shelter together from the rain. They sat under the branch of a huge and sprawling tree where it wasn't raining and contemplated the beautiful and picturesque lake that was nearby. Alina noticed that the rain had intensified, and it was good that next to them there was that huge tree, under which they managed to hide. Sirius was worried if the girl really had no pain, but Alina convinced him that she had no pain anywhere in her body. Alina was also worried about the young man because he rolled downhill, holding her in his arms. Sirius said, no matter how you look at it, they would have to spend the night here. But Alina said that they had lost their camping supplies. She realized that it seemed the lady was not pretending, that everything was fine for her. She just felt really well and could now breathe a sigh of relief. And yet, with time, all these difficulties will turn into simple, pleasant memories of an interesting trip. The girl thought about it, and Sirius asked her what she thought about this. Alina replied that what happened becomes a memory, only if you continue to remember it. Sometimes Alina seemed to be in the clouds, and began to express herself in such an unusual way. Speech that deliberately excludes her existence, as if she were someone who does not exist in Alina's future. But in Sirius's future, Alina is always nearby. She wondered why people think memories can be eternal, and, for example, he will never forget the night he spent with her outside the house. Alina cheerfully replied that this was indeed the first time she would spend her first night away from home. Sirius did not expect such a cheerful reaction, and the moment when he could be angry had already passed. But there was no good reason to be angry. It was just that Sirius was hurt by the feeling that someday they might separate. Alina promised to remember this memory. If she didn't die here from hypothermia, she would always remember this night. And she laughed. Sirius took her words seriously and stroked the girl's head so that she would throw away stupid thoughts. He apologized for not realizing it. The girl was probably very cold. Alina replied that it was a little cold, and she was starting to feel sleepy because she was very tired. Sirius invited her to lean on him, and if Alina felt inclined, she could take a short nap while he observed the situation. Although they were trapped together in the rain, Sirius's body temperature did not drop. And all thanks to the wolf's blood, whose body temperature does not drop despite the frost. The fact that divine blood flows through Sirius's veins never brought him joy. But at least in the current situation, this body turned out to be useful. It was already dark outside, and the rain had almost stopped, and Sirius was still sitting with a sleeping Helena in his arms. It became even colder as the sun set, and Sirius did not think he would be able to regain his former body temperature. Therefore, the young man completely locked the girl in his tender embrace and must not allow the heat to leave his body. After hugging her tighter, his heart began to beat wildly in his chest. He couldn't understand anything because there was nothing complicated in his actions, and he and Alina had hugged often before. But now he had completely different sensations. Therefore, in this situation, before Alina got even colder, he still had to gather the courage to hug her. It seemed like the most banal procedure, but for some reason Sirius was now terribly excited. Just like in childhood, he could no longer hug Alina with pure friendly affection. The more he hugged her, the faster his heart beat, and it turned out that he had the strongest feelings for this girl. They grew up together, and, at some point, Sirius could no longer hug Alina whenever he wanted. Until childhood, Alina was his only friend and the whole world to a child. At some point, Sirius thought he would not regret giving her everything he had. And probably this was the end of that childish affection, so he didn't know what to do next at all. To be honest, Sirius did not expect a response from her because he had already decided everything. And Alina had to accept his feelings at all costs. But he had no idea how to achieve it, and it would be difficult to implement his plans. The next day, Alina was in her room, racking her brain over what to do about Sirius. She was very upset and on the verge of tears, because she was surprised by the fact that for several months she had not understood his behavior at all. Before that golden eye that could read emotions, no one had ever been free. But it wasn't that she didn't see his emotions, but that she failed in trying to understand them. And now, having gone through various situations, Alina was able to draw a conclusion about a person's general emotional state. Sirius was now experiencing a rush of various emotions, his pure light emotions mixed with dark colors. Anxiety, nervousness, and restlessness appeared, so Alina could conclude that these emotions were negative. And now it turns out that Sirius feels bad every time he sees Alina in front of him. The girl was very upset because she thought he liked her at least a little. Alina didn't understand what she did wrong that night, and the only reason she managed to get away with it was because upon returning home she caught a bad cold. So, when she heard the news that Sirius had been in bed all day, suffering from what seemed like a fever, she couldn't visit him. Although Alina was surprised that Sirius could be sick, at the same time she felt remorse for not being able to be near him. Of course, Sirius had never shown any sign of displeasure since then. But in fact, he was still very upset. Alina, after a month of endless thoughts, concluded that Sirius had started a terrible puberty period. And to be honest, upon meeting her, Sirius's happy emotions seem much stronger. And it turns out that now he just distanced himself from her for a while, and if she waits a little, soon everything will fall back into place. Sirius may be a teenager, but Helena, as an adult soul, could behave the same way. And this is not at all because Sirius is the main character, but because he is simply Alina's friend with whom she has been together for many years. And now Sirius was the main hero of this world, and at the same time, the only beloved person in her heart. In the future, each of them will have to follow their own path, so they will have to go separate ways anyway. Helena understood that now there was no need to move away from each other, and decided to take the first step towards them. She entered his room and saw that Sirius was sleeping soundly, sitting on the sofa. And Alina asked him if he was sleeping or not. The young man replied that he wasn't sleeping, and the happy Alina sat on the sofa next to him. Alina felt her heart beating faster. She always appreciated his independence and strength, but today in his gaze, she saw something more. A desire for intimacy, and a desire to understand and be understood. Unexpectedly, the young man was the first to apologize to her, and Alina was indignant because she really wanted to say those words first. She joked that he had stolen her chance to apologize, and that in that case she should be offended. She looked him straight in the eyes and Sirius asked why the lady wanted to apologize. Alina said she completely forgot what she was going to tell him. And it seems she was very happy that they made up, and yet she behaved tactlessly towards the kind teenager. Although she was prepared for this, now, realizing that he had actually reached adolescence, Elena felt somewhat strange. She said that her father said the exam would take place soon, and although Sirius was not a candidate for successor, it wouldn't hurt him to prepare either. The Duke of Loud will never silently observe Sirius's unlimited potential and will try to find out his limits to the end. It is said that this is a kind of setup to make the future brighter. But Sirius's fate is harsher than pleasant. Sirius really didn't want to take the exam, but he had to do it anyway. The young man, after all, was the main character, so it wasn't that easy to break him. He said that more difficult tests await him in the future, so he will have to face something like a simple exam. It was once Sirius said that revenge was his goal, and that someday he would like to find his place. And in this case, something like taking revenge on his half-brother will be really difficult for him. Sirius is constantly moving towards his original destiny, and even now, at such a young age. It is not surprising that he has such a character, one of whose traits is getting everything he wants. Sirius said there was something, but now was not the right time to be ready to tell it. The young man suddenly asked why Elena kept moving away from him. He noticed that she must have moved away unconsciously and took her hand to ask her a question. He asked where she was trying to go now because he wanted her to be with him. Elena asked why she should move. There was so much space around them again, but Sirius closed his eyes and pretended to have heard her words. Elena has not understood anything for a long time, and sometimes Sirius started to be strangely stubborn. But nevertheless, when they spend time like this, moments from childhood appear before her eyes. Then they lay down on a much smaller sofa, designed for one person, but even in such cramped conditions, there was plenty of space for them. The only thing that hasn't changed is that in those same days Sirius, just like now, was strangely stubborn. Her proposal surprised me a little, but to be honest, Sirius was incredibly sweet. And at the same time, Elena realized another fact. At some point, she not only found herself unable to avoid attracting his attention, but she became his closest friend. Now she walked shoulder to shoulder with the writer of the future in this world, only in comparison with the past. She was no longer afraid of Sirius, and what she feared was that her heart would be thrown into the puddle of loneliness. In the future, even when she wants to see him, she won't be able to, so now Elena decided to have enough of him. Sirius had a special charm, and the sunlight fell pleasantly on his silver hair. But unexpectedly, the young man asked if the girl liked his face, since she was staring at him so fixedly. Because the girl continued to examine him this whole time, and the young man definitely wasn't wrong this time. Elena jumped off the bed surprised, and it turned out that all this time Sirius felt her gaze. Sirius laughed, because the girl seemed to be calmly looking at the smallest details and apparently, she had no intention of stopping. And now, seeing how she looked at him, forgetting everything, he could safely say that he had completely grown according to her tastes. The young man said that if he successfully passes the exam, he must ask Elena to grant one of his wishes. Elena thought Sirius shouldn't wish for her to disappear from his life forever. Therefore, she asked what exactly he wanted, and Sirius said that if he told her, it wouldn't be interesting. In addition to the halo of joy around Sirius, Elena also saw a very bright reflection of despair. Sirius said that having some kind of reward would give him strength, and asked if Elena was willing to accept. As for the reward, the Duke of Loud is stingy about giving money to the winner. But it turns out Sirius wants something else. Elena agreed, and if he returned safe and sound, she promised to grant one of his wishes. Elena didn't think he would be so happy, and she probably shouldn't have worried about it at all. But Sirius refused to admit what he desired and smiled mysteriously in response. The date of the exam set by the Duke of Low was slowly approaching, but unlike Courtney and Joseph, Sirius offered to behave as usual without showing a hint of emotion. Everyone in the ducal castle was prepared for this to the teeth, but it seemed that Elena was the only one who would remain out of business until the end. Moreover, all sorts of reasonings about why the attitude towards Elena became special were cut off at the root. While Elena was thinking about this, Joseph turned to her and asked what she was doing there alone. At the age of 17, his face acquired handsome features, but Joseph's character did not change at all. He was still trying to intimidate Alina, but the adult girl could now defend herself. When he tried to force her to play the piano, she was sure that there was another person for whom she would play a beautiful melody. But suddenly, Joseph said they needed to talk privately and asked the maids to wait outside the door. Alina wondered if Joseph was truly free, because now he was supposed to be busy with estate matters. The exam the Duke was going to give was just around the corner, and the test topic had not been announced. Alina noticed that Joseph was not angry and looked extremely relaxed, but his attitude seemed very strange to her. It was as if it was written on his face that he was very busy, but he deigned to dedicate time to her. Alina asked him why he had come here, and the young man replied that he hadn't expected anything from the start. He said he had come to play the role of an older brother, just as she wanted. The young man told the maids to leave quickly, because he had an important conversation with Helena. From the outside, it seemed that Helen and Joseph had a very strong family relationship. Joseph whispered that during the next week, Helena should try not to do anything that might draw attention to herself. These words did not resemble the threats she had heard before, and seemed like real advice. He asked Helena to listen to her older brother's words, and, above all, to be very careful in her actions in front of Courtney. Joseph said there was no point in going into detail, so he asked Alina to remember well that from that day on she should avoid meeting her sister. In fact, Alina knew, even without his advice, that she should be careful with this persistent and vile girl. Seeing that her situation changed in the blink of an eye, the servants working in the residence quickly took it for granted. But her brother and sister, who were competing for the title of family heir, were not at all happy with such changes. They were outraged by the injustice of their father's decision, and the saddest thing was that she completely shared their feelings. Joseph is openly jealous and envious of his father's affection for Helen. But at least he doesn't hate her. And even on the contrary, he had opposite feelings towards Helena, but he hid them behind a mask of insults. Alina asked why he suddenly decided to warn about this, and probably all because he considers her his dear little sister. These changes occurred at a time when Joseph was bedridden after a fight with Sirius. When she forgave him, so he remained unharmed. The young man frowned and said that if Alina keeps talking nonsense, he will simply leave. Alina asked to tell him what was wrong and promised to listen with all seriousness this time. The young man said that Courtney is enraged by the fact of spending time with Sirius. So there is no point in provoking an already nervous person once again. The young man was right, and Courtney had been very sensitive to everything lately. And Joseph noticed that his sister would soon turn 20, and his father had not yet chosen a successor. Essentially, Courtney is occupying a position that is only close to the status of successor. And it could be said that she has now done everything possible to earn the Duke's recognition. But meanwhile, Alina enjoyed the Duke's special favor and must have been the most annoying person for her. Alina said she would follow his plan and avoid meeting Courtney and drawing anyone's attention for the next week. Because due to the Duke's prohibition, no one taught Alina fencing, and she also couldn't develop resistance to poisons. Therefore, her brother warned Helena to stay away from Sirius. But the moment he said these words, Sirius was right next to her. Joseph asked why Helena had such a strange and scared face, as if she had seen a ghost. Sirius placed his hand on his shoulder, and Joseph turned around scared, feeling someone's hand on him. Sirius asked the young man to repeat again the words he had just said. And hearing his threatening voice, the young man became seriously frightened by the surprise. He tried to say that Sirius was completely wrong, and the boy wanted to know what was wrong with his understanding. Joseph shouted that Sirius could probably finish him off right now, but Alina asked him to be patient and promised to fix everything. She asked Sirius to calm down first and told him she would explain everything now. Alina suggested starting with a conversation and not with the usual assault on the young man. Sirius changed his anger for mercy and agreed that talking was also a very good way. Alina sat on the sofa and asked Sirius to sit with her to talk. Now she needed to seat Joseph and start a conversation, but for some reason, the young man stood like a pillar in front of them. Suddenly, he turned around and announced that he was leaving and wished His Highness a good time. In that case, she asked Joseph to leave immediately, and now she had to figure it out by herself again. Elena only wanted to repay him for giving her some advice, and it was just mutual help. She told Joseph that if he was grateful to her, then he shouldn't die in the exam, and return safe and sound. Elena wondered how many difficulties befell her because of one idiot brother. To calm Sirius down, she had to throw him onto the sofa, but this time the young man reacted calmer than she thought. She said that what she heard was not at all what she thought, but Elena did not want there to be any misunderstanding between her and Sirius. She told him in detail what Joseph had conveyed to her and said that she didn't know the reason, but that he clearly had no bad intentions. Sirius held his head and said that he understood everything, offering to continue the conversation next time. Perhaps Sirius suddenly got angry, but the tone of his emotions did not seem like anger. And this range of emotions was as if the young man was excited and at the same time seized by anger. There was something else here, and it clearly looked like embarrassment or some other similar emotion. The next day, Elena was upset, and all because of one young man. He never showed up all day, and in the morning he said he had no intention of having breakfast. But when he came for lunch, Elena was told that Sirius had already had lunch and left. So she was sure that he was avoiding her because of what happened yesterday. In the end, it turned out that Joseph was also looking for Sirius, and he was not at the training ground. Joseph asked Elena to return to her room before meeting Courtney, and she really couldn't ignore his words. After all, Sirius couldn't avoid meeting her forever, and since he occupied the next room, she could easily catch him when he returned. But suddenly, the girl felt that someone was definitely standing in front of her room door. She opened the door and saw Sirius, asking him since when he had been there. Sirius asked if Elena could give him some time, because he had something to tell her. She suggested that he move to the hall and talk there in a quiet environment. Elena was overwhelmed with emotions, so she decided to utter only monosyllabic words. But when she saw his face, it filled up again with pleasant feelings. The girl noticed his angry face, and in any case, clearly saw his drooping ears and tail. Sirius said that he just didn't know how to look her in the eye today, so he continued to avoid meeting her. Elena said that he hadn't done anything wrong to her, and that more than anything in the world, she hated him avoiding her. The young man felt even more guilty because Elena forgives him without hearing the reason why he behaved that way. The young man looked uncomfortable, although Elena said everything was fine, but Sirius was an incredibly complex person. From the moment of his birth until now, his world was limited to the Loud family. And members of this family usually live by erasing their emotions. But this is not a problem that can be solved in the blink of an eye. So first Elena asked Sirius what he wanted to tell her. She perfectly saw all his sudden waves of emotions, but he instantly managed to feign indifference. Sirius patted her head and told her that he could have no complaints against her, because she was very kind. Elena understood that he was trying to avoid answering this way, and once she was ready, she let him get away with it. When Sirius looked at the girl, it seemed to him that she grasped everything on the fly. But at the same time, she looked very small. Elena stated that she was indeed born much earlier than him. But the fact that she has the ability to see other people's emotions is something she did not share with him, neither in childhood nor now. And she wasn't going to talk about it in the future either, because she was sure he wouldn't take it well. If one day Sirius finds out the whole truth, where is the guarantee that he won't dislike her? And for some reason, she couldn't imagine it. Sirius stated that Elena was nothing like a member of the Loud family, because no one in the family would grant him forgiveness until they heard a full explanation. Elena stated that his words did not spoil her mood in the least. And she didn't hear anything special. She said that later she could tell him and share with him what exactly his crime was. The butler unexpectedly approached them and made a courteous bow, which hadn't happened before, because if the butler came in person, then it was clearly about some serious matter. He said that the Duke wanted to see someone, and it turned out he had invited Madame Alina to visit him. She entered her father's office, where Joseph was already clearly angry. It seemed to him that there was something urgent to do, so he rushed without bothering to put his clothes in order. Alina lost hope that her father would finally reveal the details of the test. But he never called her to discuss important matters, and even Sirius was surprised to hear the butler's words. The girl felt very anxious, while she and Joseph awaited their father's invitation. Courtney, enraged, stormed out of his office and ordered everyone to come in immediately. All the children stood before the Duke, who was about to make an important announcement to them. Alina felt that Joseph was as confused as her, but with Courtney, things were different. She clearly had a mental disorder, and judging by the expression on her face, the girl was not herself. The Duke said that all children know very well how important the exam Courtney is taking this time is. She was facing a very difficult exam, the results of which would be different from previous exams. And it could be said that all previous exams were just preparation for this exam. Joseph was currently busy preparing for his part of the exam, but Alina had nothing to do with the race to inherit the title. The Duke was surprised. All the children had faces as if he were talking about someone else's business. But from this very second, this exam will no longer be anyone else's business. The Duke declared that Joseph and Helen would also take the same exam along with Courtney. He ordered them to bring a bright yellow branch from the golden field, and their departure would take place in 3 days. He determined that the deadline would be 1 week, and those who cannot get a branch by then will be happy to stay here forever. The Duke noticed that now all 3 of them have realized reality and are showing very interesting reactions. Joseph was extremely confused and looked scared, and Courtney was absolutely furious. And the most annoying person for the Duke was Helen, whose internal emotions he could not read. Unlike other children, she was raised like a flower in a greenhouse, and now she was abandoned to certain death. The Duke clearly saw the emotion of fear in her, and announced that whoever can best overcome this test will receive the title of successor. After this conversation, Courtney did not want to leave Alina alone and immediately started bothering her. She pressed her against the wall and looked her straight in the eyes with a bitter animalistic glare. Courtney hated this girl with all her soul, and her anger came out constantly when she saw Alina. Courtney asked why Alina was so confused and if she really didn't hear what those around her were whispering. She said that everyone was talking about her father wanting to name Alina as his successor. But for some reason she did it because she didn't know anything. Thinking about this, Courtney could calmly turn a blind eye to her father's favoritism towards Alina alone. But her heart didn't want her father's affection at all, but the power with which she could suppress everyone. But she couldn't find out what the residents of the Laud residence were saying, how the Duke could hand over the whole family to Helena as well. At first it was just a furtive whisper, but since the Duke did not react in any way to such a conversation, it all turned into rumors. Finally, the rumors reached Courtney, and she tried to ignore the nonsense that the ignorant fools kept saying. And most importantly, what she feared was that all these rumors would turn out to be true. She suggested that Alina might be the first to find out about everything and deliberately spread all these rumors in the residence. Therefore, she tried to convince the girl that she knew who her father wanted to name as his successor. Alina trusted her actions and stated that she did nothing of the sort. Her sister squeezed her throat, but Alina simply couldn't resist because the difference in strength was too great. The girl said that it all started in childhood, when she stuck to Sirius like a leech, and probably seeks to benefit from him. She was sure that it was because of Sirius Hyperion that her whole happy life was ruined. And it was precisely because Helena fell into Sirius's soul that she, who was nobody, had a chance to be at the top of the family. Sirius was still just a boy when he first came to the Loud residence, and it was very easy to sit next to him at that time. And Courtney was sure that if Alina hadn't existed, she would have had every chance to become the successor. So she tried to figure out what was so wonderful about Alina. But my sister got even angrier because Alina didn't answer any of her questions. Alina managed to escape from her hands and now gained time by using the trick Sirius showed her. But Alina understood that Courtney would soon follow her and grab her, so while trying to run even faster, she didn't notice how she was stumbling. She only had time to feel that someone had caught her, and upon raising her head, she was surprised to see Sirius in front of her. Sirius immediately saw the strangulation marks on Alina's neck, and rage and aggression boiled in his veins. Sirius was about to ask her to wait a little, but he saw Alina trembling violently. And after a couple of seconds, she burst into loud crying that was heard throughout the residence. The young man was very worried and asked the girl to calm down, promising that he would definitely stay with her. Alina cried loudly and said that she had no idea why everyone was doing this to her. The father pretended to be on her side, but in reality, his life was as valuable to him as the life of a fly. And the sister was now inventing something for herself and hated her to death. What she hated most was this residence, where everyone became so strange. Alina really couldn't stand this place and really wanted to finally get out of here. After a while, she calmed down a bit, and all this time Sirius was by her side. Although Sirius ran as fast as he could when he heard that Courtney had dragged Alina with her. He was still late, but now it was too late to regret what happened. And most importantly, make sure this never happens again. He promised Alina that he would fix everything so that not even Courtney's shadow could get near her. A little earlier, Alina told Sirius the reason why her father called her along with her brother and her sister. He told everyone to go to the golden field and bring back a bright yellow branch. And that would be the exam task. Alina was sure that for her, this was the same as a death sentence. And she told Sirius about her experiences. The golden field was the name of the area in the western part of the Loud residence. And bright yellow branches can only be found there. And it can be safely said that this is the place with the richest magical mineral vein in the entire family domain. Of the family, and in the center of this golden field, there are bright yellow trees. Because the branches of this tree only grow here, there are many who want to get them. And it is difficult to feel safe in this place, all because of the fierce attack of monsters. Helen was very afraid that the Duke of Loud would send her to such a dangerous place. She told Sirius that she didn't understand how her father could devise such an examination, because she really couldn't do anything. Sirius asked her why she thought so, since there were many things she was good at. He recalled that the tutors who came to the residence always praised Alina and said that she had excellent skills, and that she grasped everything on the fly. And there is definitely something in which she has no equal. And at the same time, this is the most important thing now. She is always next to Sirius and does an excellent job with him. So he assured her that for now, she should do what she does best. He asked the girl not to worry and never to speak like that again. 3 days ago, Sirius was in the Duke's office and heard the news that he would not take the exam to inherit the title. The Duke said that the boy was asking about something so obvious and that he had no reason to participate in the test because he was not a descendant of the family. But he also pointed out that Sirius did not have to be related to the same family to become a member of the Load family. He asked the boy not to make a fool of himself and asked if he probably wanted to stay with Helena. Sirius canceled. This man is really like a snake, and he has already noticed his feelings for Helena, of which no one knew anything. Sirius really didn't want Helena, he just wanted to be close to her because he loved her. The Duke stated that his reward depends on Sirius's abilities, and he does not exclude this possibility. The Duke said he wanted to give the young man only one special task. He said that he plans to reveal to his children soon the details of the exam awaiting them. And the content of this task is such that they will need to bring a branch from the golden field. He also said that this exam will not only be intended for Courtney, but Joseph and Alina will try their luck in this test. Until today, the Duke had never forced Alina to participate in the fight for the title. And he always looked at her as a weak creature. And in the golden field, full of bloodthirsty monsters, Alina will never survive. Obviously, Sirius could not send Helena alone to such a difficult and dangerous place. The Duke ordered him to tell Helena that he would follow her as if it were his own will. The man stated that there was a jewel that belonged a long time ago to the Lode family, but that it was missing, and Sirius should find it in the Golden Field and bring it. The Duke said that this jewel was different from all the others, and that he was giving the young man time to find it out himself. The terms of the deal were quite good. The Duke said that if Sirius successfully completed the task, he would absolutely fulfill any wish. The Duke found it very funny what that girl had done to make Sirius so worried about her. Not long ago, when she accidentally learned about the existence of a precious stone, a shiver ran down her body. That night, when he thought about Helen's real father and his twin brother, the Duke took and started reading a book with the family tree. How he committed suicide and all traces of him were erased. The Duke laughed at his stupidity. But at the same time, he was angry with himself for doing such useless things. He suddenly discovered an old note that was cleverly hidden in a book. And in this note, the Duke found something interesting that made him doubt some things. A story was recorded about a gem that allowed the Lode family to obtain the power of the golden eye. It told the main reason why the family had golden eyes. The ability to read emotions is contained solely in the golden gem of the Golden Field, where a tree with beautiful and bright golden foliage grows. Unfortunately, the paper was torn, so the Duke could not get more clues. But he believed it didn't matter, because Sirius could handle it anyway. As the Hyperion Empire revived, the power of the Lode dukedom faded for no reason. So the Duke hoped that the descendant of the wolf noble would become his obedient dog on a short leash. Due to his affection for Helena. Helena had so much to do that day that for a moment it seemed to her that she would soon go crazy. Now she slowly began to realize that everything happening to her was reality. And in the near future, she had to participate in the exam to obtain the right to inherit the title. Before the exams, she met Joseph, who asked if Alina was really going to take Sirius with her. The young man said that without the boy he wouldn't have a chance, but since she has Sirius, he also has his own strategy. Joseph stated that he decided to team up with Courtney and then planned to act alone. But everything was so confusing that Alina felt confused because it was the first time she participated in the exam for the right to inherit the title. However, it wouldn't surprise her at all if someone in her family decided to commit cruel betrayal. Alina asked the young man to always be on guard because Courtney was seriously angry. Joseph stated that it was time to leave when Sirius approached them. He asked her to try hard and wished her good luck to pass the exam. Sirius replied that, no matter what, the young man still owed him and Alina. Alina noticed that Joseph is a very clever boy who will survive anywhere. The butler loudly announced that all participants must gather in the estate's courtyard. The Duke asked each participant to approach in turn. Courtney approached him first, and the Duke carefully looked at his eldest daughter. The Duke said that since he hadn't seen her for several days, he thought she had decided to refuse to participate in the exam. The man noticed that Courtney wasn't even trying to hide her emotions and disliked her more and more each time. Courtney was the best among her siblings from an early age, so he kept her close to him from the beginning. But eventually, she became too arrogant and wasn't even able to control her subordinates. Therefore, there was no one on her side. But most importantly, she started showing hostility towards her father too early. After Courtney, Joseph approached the Duke, who was determined to win. After Joseph, it was Helena's turn, and the Duke politely asked her to come to him. Helena felt very excited next to him, as the Duke looked her in the eyes. He said he hoped not a single hair would fall from her head while undergoing the test. And the Duke understood that Alina was all he needed for his evil plan to succeed. But what irritated him the most was the fact that she was the only one whose emotions he couldn't read. The Duke loudly declared that all preparations were complete and wished everyone to return safe. In sound, they arrived at the place where the test was supposed to begin, and Sirius noticed that if you walked a little further into the forest, the atmosphere, as if you had started a journey, would disappear without a trace. Alina couldn't even imagine that this would be such a confusing process, but now they were really in place. Everyone stood in front of the forest, which was considered the beginning of that very golden field. And just by thinking that Sirius was next to her, there wasn't a drop of emotion in her soul. Sirius warned Alina to check that she hadn't forgotten anything in the carriage before leaving. The girl checked all her pockets and replied that she definitely took everything she needed. To be honest, regarding this pendant, she debated for a long time whether to take it with her or not. But still, this was the only available trace of her mother, which was the most important thing to her, which she couldn't part with for a long period of time. Sirius said that the dagger must always be with her, but he really hoped that she would not have to use it. The butler handed maps of the area to the participants and informed them that they were forced to say goodbye and leave. The butler informed the boys that he would see them in exactly 1 week. And finally, the long-awaited moment arrived for everyone when the exam began. The rules of the exam were simple. There was to be a deadline of 1 week, and not to leave the golden field during this period. Everything except this is allowed, for example, and even attacking each other. Courtney and Joseph, as expected, were already on their way, and Sirius suggested that Alina first decide on a route and then leave. First, they had to cross the mountain, so Alina suggested going a little faster on the first day and set up camp earlier. And then, after about 4 days, they were supposed to reach the center of the golden field. But Sirius noticed that there was some kind of problem. He was curious why this place was called the Golden Field, and no matter how you looked at it, he was right in the middle of the mountain slope. Sirius held out his hand to Helena, and after so long, made a distant grimace to hide his emotion. Helena took Sirius by the hand and told him she would do anything but fight. So Sirius joked that from now on she would be his subordinate. Helena didn't know the reason, but it turned out that his joke made Sirius seriously offended. In this case, she suggested that he choose the role of husband for her so that she wouldn't be his subordinate. Sirius replied that that was a pretty good excuse for a hastily given excuse. Alina and Sirius had planned everything in advance and could now leave together. The climb was difficult, but the first day passed well without encountering any monsters. And while preparing a place to sleep, Alina said it was like playing camping. Sirius thought that from tomorrow, they should be very careful. The mountains would not be so difficult to cross, so monsters would start appearing on their path. While planning tomorrow's hike, he watched Alina tenderly the whole time, who was sleeping soundly next to him. She was very tired and also very worried, although she pretended not to be, and the young man noticed that her sleeping appearance was exactly the same as when she was a little girl. He just told himself that he needed to be extremely attentive, but he involuntarily smiled. And he allowed himself to be kind, and seeing her face so charming and beautiful, it was impossible not to smile. The girl suddenly moved and uttered Sirius's name in her sleep. Alina woke up, rubbed her eyes, and asked why Sirius still wasn't going to bed. The girl remembered the night watch, which they agreed upon, because they decided to sleep in shifts. Sirius said he could still sleep, and that he would definitely wake her up a little later, and that she shouldn't worry about anything. At that moment, he was very afraid that Alina would notice how he was staring at her while she slept. But most likely everything would turn out fine. The next morning, Alina woke up early, and it turned out that Sirius didn't wake her up all night. He said he wasn't tired at all, so he didn't wake her up and everything was fine. Alina thought that she really wanted the young man to remember all this, because it's great to share memories between two people. They cooked a delicious soup over the fire, and the girl was surprised how fragrant it was. Sirius stated that it had been cold all night, but now he felt as if his whole body was melting from the heat that had penetrated. And it is completely unknown what they will have to face from this moment of the campaign. Alina turned to Sirius and said that she had been thinking about something in her free time. Although they had plotted a difficult route, she thought following it was a bit risky, and that it would be better to climb a tall tree and look around before leaving. Sirius thought it was a great idea and agreed to do exactly what the girl suggested. When she was little, Sirius taught her to climb trees because he had no other choice at that moment. And the girl cried loudly. The young man smiled, raised his hands, and said that he was giving up, and that in this battle he could not defeat her. He realized that after they left the Lode Castle, Alina's expression became very cheerful. In fact, if Alina is assigned any task, she will handle it perfectly, and the Duke family brainwashed her year after year, telling her she couldn't do anything. And even if Sirius ends up in hell, she won't care. And all she wants is for Alina to always smile radiantly. Alina climbed a tree and said that Sirius shouldn't distract her, and that she was trying to concentrate. She looked ahead and thought, what she saw looked very strange. Her plan was simply to climb higher and see the entire forest in sight, but instead, she saw a strange fog coming from the forest. Moreover, it didn't look like ordinary fog, and these were definitely the colors of emotions that can only be seen by the golden eye. But in the golden field, where only terrifying monsters live, there was no place from which emotions could arise. And monsters also really had emotions. But Alina had never heard of this kind of research. Alina climbed down from the tree and said she had seen many things and asked Sirius to give her a map. She needed to adjust her route to avoid monsters as much as possible. Therefore, Alina marked important spots and said they could move on. After a while, Sirius was surprised that they had already reached the resting place. The sun hadn't set yet, and he was very surprised that they didn't encounter a single monster, and only stumbled upon 4 small ones that were very shy. Alina supposed that the monsters were also surrounded by a haze of emotions, so they were able to avoid a collision with them in advance. Sirius decided to stop under one of the trees, and since they arrived earlier than expected, they were able to rest a bit. Alina suggested placing the sleeping bag right here, and noticed that Sirius had been extremely focused the whole time. Before she had time to finish these words, the young man rested his head on her shoulder and closed his eyes from exhaustion. He said he was sleepy. Alina laughed because she was happy to see the young man becoming whimsical again after so long. They decided to stay near this tree, while Sirius decided to take a nap and gain strength. Alina was very happy to have been able to find time for Sirius to rest today. But tomorrow, they had to cross that area. Alina felt that as long as Sirius was with her, she wasn't afraid at all. The next day, they encountered monsters and Sirius confronted them incredibly fast. Alina was annoyed. They had encountered monsters many times before, but they kept appearing incessantly. She still tried to move only in the direction where the haze of emotions was barely perceptible. Sirius asked if there were no problems. Surely they could continue their way again. But suddenly, Alina noticed a haze of a different color, and it was clearly Joseph. Or Courtney. She really hoped it wasn't Courtney, because she knew it was better not to cross her path. And in fact, it turned out to be Joseph, and Sirius and Alina saw him hiding among the bushes. Joseph looked strange and was clearly upset. But the strangest thing was that he was walking in a completely different direction and moving away from the center. They approached him, and Alina asked why her brother was walking in the other direction, and what was wrong with his appearance. She asked him to tell her what happened, because before he had gone to the forest with Courtney, Joseph stated that he never expected to find them and that they were nothing less than fate. Sirius asked him to explain in more detail and tell him everything that was happening now. Joseph put his hand on his chest and said in a serious voice that he had something to tell them. Before the test began, he and Courtney agreed to cooperate until the morning of the 3rd day. Fighting alongside the monsters, Joseph was sure that it would be nice to be alone. But at night, neither of them could sleep a wink because they were afraid of being betrayed. That day, when they barely reached the 2nd parking spot, Courtney introduced Joseph to her true comrades. Next to her were masked young men, and hiding their identity meant they were talking about strangers. Courtney decided to seek outside help, which meant she would have to pay bills in the future. And she didn't think about the consequences at all. Courtney had the weak gift of a golden eye, with which she could only read strong emotions. So now Joseph had to pretend to be scared in order to survive. After meeting strangers, Courtney said that she would now leave Joseph freely. The young man noticed that most of these people looked like well-trained knights, or even assassins. And although he handled the sword masterfully, numerical superiority was still on their side. Therefore, Joseph congratulated Courtney in advance because, upon her return, she would definitely officially become the successor to the Laud family. Joseph had to play along with her games, so he promised to stay by her side until the end. But as soon as he learned what her plan was, he went to His Highness to tell everything. Her code name was a phrase that meant hunting a false wolf. Joseph said that Courtney and her gang would take Lord Sirius's life in this exam. False wolf is a derogatory nickname that the Emperor has recently started spreading. And this alone was enough to confirm Courtney's insidious plans. Everyone immediately realized that Courtney had definitely allied herself with the Emperor to have all the power in her own hands. Elena pointed out that the Emperor has almost completely lost public support at this moment, and that choosing this type of alliance will not lead to anything good. And this meant only one thing now: Courtney wasn't thinking about the consequences at all. And if even one mistake is made, the Laud family will instantly end up in the Emperor's hands. Elena thought, recently the Duke has openly expressed his hostility towards the current Emperor. And after the destruction of Sirius, the Laud dukedom will be the next target. Sirius said that, in that case, they should attack first and not wait until they are attacked. Elena got worried and asked Sirius for them to be together again, because a squad of assassins wants to kill him. The young man replied that he could not turn back, because they had no proof. If you come back empty-handed, Courtney will simply get the power she desires. The young man was sure that all rotten sprouts must be cut from the root. And if it wasn't done, they would have to face disastrous consequences in the future. Sirius said that, moreover, we need to find out who those people who looked like knights were. And it would be even better to get rid of them. Joseph agreed with his words and invited him and Helena to return to the castle. In this situation, Helena was in great danger, and Sirius was not sure that Joseph could protect her. Helena was very worried that the atmosphere among everyone had deteriorated a lot. And she was afraid of what might happen next. She was very worried that all this happened because of her fault and again became a burden that bothered everyone. However, she didn't want to be a burden to Sirius either, so she didn't know the best way to express her opinion. Sirius suggested that if the girl didn't mind, she could stay by his side, and said that they are a good team that can face all difficulties. Elena was very happy with this proposal with a happy smile and declared that she agreed to go with him. Although Joseph often irritated her, Elena still wanted him to arrive safely at the castle. After this, Sirius thought of several reasons why it was necessary to attack first. And if they couldn't convict Courtney for lack of evidence, they could be given the opportunity to act at their own discretion. It was immediately obvious to Elena who would be the first person Courtney would decide to get rid of. Elena was very surprised when Sirius offered her this terrifying option where they would need to use monsters. And they had no other choice, because in the center of the forest, he had already managed to destroy several individual assassins. And the main forces had already noticed that he had started to act. The monsters, of course, were not on their side, but they were also not allies of their enemies. If their plan succeeded, they could solve the problem without lifting a finger. Elena was very worried about Sirius, who had to perform very important tasks to save them. And it was quite natural in the current situation to worry that Sirius might get hurt. But there was something else that made her heart ache even more. This image of Sirius, not showing even a bit of emotion at that moment when his sword takes the lives of others. The same thing happened before, when her tutor's maid tried to kill Sirius. He continued to remain incredibly calm for a child. He had to endure so many dangers that even at that age, he could react calmly to such a threat. Elena understood that her words that she was worried could not change the current situation. But the young man said that thanks to her, he now feels an incredible surge of strength and pleasant emotions. And he promised to put into practice what was said if his partner provides him with the necessary support. Despite her concerns, the operation went smoothly, and as soon as Elena found a suitable monster, she took care of it early until sparks started flying from the latter's eyes. And she also managed to discover one thing, which was that by touching haze, she could immediately recognize where it originated from. And every time Alina precisely pointed out the right spot, Sirius asked nothing. And she only felt his unlimited trust. On the way, they encountered about 15 people, and now exactly half the number that Joseph had expressed remained. They overheard a conversation, as the young men commented that someone was definitely blocking their path. Sirius suggested that they move a little closer, and no matter how you looked at it. It seemed that the gang was starting to fall apart. Suddenly, Alina screamed in horror, and huge evil monsters approached them. In fact, hordes of huge, bloodthirsty beasts were heading towards them, whose roar shook the entire earth. Just as Helena and Sirius rushed out of the bushes, the mercenaries saw them. And the commander ordered the capture of the young people. Sirius had only let his guard down for a moment, but now he realized that his operation had been a complete failure. The mercenaries repeated after them and provoked the monsters, but these did not know their exact location. And they started carrying out the plan without even knowing that it could end badly for them. Sirius grabbed Helena tightly and rushed to run in the other direction, while the bloodthirsty monsters took care of the assassin gang. Some of them managed to escape. They caught up with Helena and Sirius and immediately started threatening that the end had come for them. Out of nowhere, a bearded man approached them and told them that during the time they hadn't seen each other, Sirius's fighting skills had significantly improved. This man was one of the Emperor's closest bodyguards, and Sirius felt like he was back in the Imperial Palace. But only now he was already a young adult, and not that helpless child that everyone could make fun of. The man smiled sarcastically and asked if Sirius intended to surrender. And he was as conceited and arrogant as before. Nothing can be done, but he will have to satisfy his wish and show the boys where he belongs. Sirius asked Alina to close her eyes for a second to quickly solve the problem. Although Alina was really scared, she couldn't do it, and clearly something was wrong. Alina shouted loudly that it was all a trap, and having captured all their attention, they were going to throw arrows at him. The man shouted loudly that the plan had changed, and loudly ordered everyone to shoot a volley of arrows at the target. They were sure Sirius couldn't evade it, but he grabbed Alina and jumped off the high cliff. The mercenaries approached the cliff and saw an enormous height, after which survival was simply impossible. And the man laughed at Sirius because he decided to protect the girl, and as a result, received one of the poisoned arrows. After the fall, Helena woke up first and saw an arrow in Sirius's body. And since the young man showed no signs of life, it means there was a lot of poison in the arrow. They constantly tried to poison Sirius, not to mention that he had developed immunity to poisons. But Alina understood that she couldn't do anything now. So she decided to hide in a safe cave until Sirius regained consciousness. Throughout this whole way, Alina held Sirius tightly in her arms and understood that now it was her turn to protect this young man. She took him with her to the cave and thought maybe the assassins were already nearby, and it would probably be better for them to go deeper. And Alina believed at every step that they had very little time left. In the distance, Alina saw a stone from which a glow emanated, and this could be the entrance from the opposite side of the cave. A strange energy emanated from the stone, and when Alina tried to touch it, her hand passed through the wall. She had no idea about ancient magic, but she understood one important thing: that no one could follow them if they entered through this wall. Alina was very scared, but if she was going to protect Sirius, now she had no other way. She closed her eyes and stepped forward with full confidence that everything would definitely be fine for them. Suddenly, she felt a pleasant wind and opened her eyes, seeing the same golden field in front of her. Alina opened her eyes in surprise and held her breath, realizing what had just happened to them. Because in front of her was the same golden field, but sent to them by Duke Loud. Alina placed Sirius on the ground and had to remove the poisoned arrowhead from his body as quickly as possible. She found herbal ointment, a clean cloth, disinfectant, and painkiller in Sirius's pocket. And it turned out that the young man had prepared everything in advance. The young man took care of himself in advance in case Alina got hurt, and in the end he himself got injured while protecting her. She held her head and promised Sirius that they would certainly get out of here safe and sound. A few minutes later, Elena managed to remove the arrow and bandage the wound, although she turned out to be a little clumsy. She did her best to help the exhausted young man. She knew he needed rest, and after they entered the forest, he never slept properly. Elena decided that she also needed to take a break and looked around. It was a very interesting place, where even without the sun the sky was blue and the ears shone as if they were really made of gold. And in the middle there was a tree that seemed to shake its branches, inviting you to come closer. Without magic, such a place would definitely not have been created, and Elena approached this huge tree with interest. She looked at a tree that seemed to really understand human speech. If you look closely, amber tears were protruding from the tree, which was its precious resin. Elena thought someone must have damaged this tree to get this incredible resin. She was very curious what the resin tasted like and put a small piece in her mouth. It was strange, but the moment she saw the amber tear, her heart pounded like crazy. So she unconsciously put it in her mouth and felt the need to eat even more. And probably everyone wanted to taste these amber tears oozing through the bark. But Elena said she didn't want to cause pain to this tree. She returned to Sirius and lay down next to him, having no idea where the exit was. So she could only protect him if she was by his side. Elena's eyes were drooping, and she decided to take a short nap while she could. She woke up and heard someone talking about poisoned arrows and Sirius. Elena jumped up because it was Courtney's voice, as she was dealing with one of her mercenaries. Elena didn't know how they moved here from the Golden Field, but she understood that they shouldn't be detected. In the end, it turned out that Courtney was standing with the same man who was going to attack Sirius. In this conversation, she warned Courtney that the Emperor was behind him, and that the lady was the one who needed His Majesty's help. The girl turned around and threateningly declared that she had heard their words. And she wanted to ask him what he planned to do now after the mistake. Elena felt strange emotions, as if a feeling of murderous intent was intertwined with a feeling of confusion. She looked at Sirius and understood that they shouldn't be found at least until he regained consciousness. Courtney shouted loudly that she would take care of the girl herself, and that she first needed to find out where she was hiding. Suddenly, they felt a terrible pain running through their entire head with sharp knives. At that moment, a large black cloud of energy formed in Elena's hands. She was surprised that the light of confusion grew with herself. But everything was different and happened exactly as she wanted, and she noticed that he changed according to her wishes. In this case, she could easily control the emotions and feelings that were being targeted. Therefore, the man felt strong aggression and attacked his ally Courtney with a dagger. She continued to manipulate their emotions and intended to pit them against each other. And so, all this time they fought with daggers, and each of them wanted to brutally treat their opponent. Elena was surprised that she could now control the emotions of strangers. And she ordered them to do what she wanted. And it turns out that, using the gift of the golden eye, she could control other people's emotions. Which means that to make the most of this ability, she must practice more. At that moment, Sirius suddenly woke up and called out Elena's name, looking at the frightened girl. He asked her why she was crying, and after these words, he rushed to hug the young man who had finally woken up. Elena cried with joy for being able to hug him again and hear his voice, which she hadn't heard for 1,000 years, it seemed. This whole time, Elena was very afraid that Sirius had been poisoned by an arrow and would never open his eyes again. And she really didn't want to go through this experience twice, and now she was simply happy that he woke up. After a while, they set off again, and Sirius intended to go out and kill all the mercenaries. And among them, there is someone whom he must certainly eliminate, and Helena suggested that this is a man named Karen. Sirius reported that this knight was highly valued by the Emperor and was a key figure in the government. Sir Karen was an excellent strategist, so if you let him develop a plan, he will attack them again. Therefore, Sirius no longer wanted to risk Elena's safety, because they would be hit just for being near him. So now he needed to warn the Emperor and gain the trust of the Duke of Loud. And to do this, he needed to destroy all the enemies present here. And until Helena was completely under his protection, this was the only way out for her safety. Alina agreed with everything Sirius intended to do because she understood that he wanted to protect her. Although she agreed with his plan, she promised that she would not let him go anywhere alone. At that moment, the mercenaries were looking for them, who had climbed through all the bushes until now. And they couldn't figure out where they had hidden. Sirius took advantage of the best moment to attack, and with a flash struck one of the mercenaries. It was a surprise attack that Sirius had planned very carefully, and it was successful. Before that, he asked Alina to sit in the tree until the end of the battle. Closing her eyes tightly, Helena did not step aside and decided to use her power so that the assassins chasing them would fight each other. Carol did not expect everything to turn out like this, and what he saw was pure nonsense. He saw Sirius alive and unharmed, although he was sure that he had been wounded by a poisoned arrow. But at the same time, he was moving at incredible speed at these moments. And surely, the rumors that Sirius was born with divine blood were probably not lies. If those rumors are true, then he will probably pay for all the foolishness he just did. Sirius caught the right moments to strike the man, asking him not to be distracted by anything during the fight. After a few moments, it finally ended, and none of the mercenaries remained alive. Until now, Alina had only seen the Sirius who hunts monsters, but not the madman who kills people. So she asked him to close his eyes. But she doubted that she would do exactly as he told her before the fight began. The young man was very worried about what he would do if, after everything that happened, Alina started to despise him. And therefore, even he considered himself a bloodthirsty monster, unworthy of human love. Sirius felt completely confused and did not understand what he should have done. Suddenly, he heard Helena's voice, who asked him if he was done with his suffering. He raised his head and saw a girl sitting in a tree with her eyes closed, who asked him if she should wait a little longer, or if she could finally open her eyes. But it seems Alina was just pretending that she didn't see anything at all. The young man didn't know what to think and was very emotional while Alina shouted something at him. She said that everything was over now, but that she shouldn't open her eyes yet. At the moment when he dealt with the assassin who had infiltrated under the guise of a maid, Sirius was worried that Alina would start to fear him. But that day, she only confessed her gratitude to him because the young man had helped save her life. And he was protecting her. These words made his divine gift pale in comparison to the strength she showed in protecting him. And it turns out that, until this day, she only tried to protect Sirius with all her might. The young man took her hand in his and told her that now she could finally open her eyes. He smiled and asked her to finally go home together because everything was over. After everything that happened, they and Joseph were heading to the estate after a week of trials. Alina looked very tired, while Sirius looked suspiciously at Joseph sitting opposite her. Alina lay down on Sirius's lap to take a nap, and Joseph said it would be better if they traveled in separate carriages. Before this, Joseph had stumbled upon them after defeating Courtney's gang. And he couldn't believe that Sirius remained so calm after everything that had happened. Joseph told everyone that he wanted to get some fresh air because it would be great outside on this cool night. Alina asked him to take a blanket so he wouldn't freeze or catch a cold. Joseph accepted it anyway, but continued behaving like a child and said the girl should not expect any gratitude from him. Sirius was even surprised that Alina was the older sister of such a disgusting boy. But still, Joseph came to warn them that Carney was preparing an attack. Suddenly, Sirius noticed there was something on Helena's clothes and pulled a golden petal from her hood. He remembered the secret task the Duke had assigned him when he would go to the Golden Field. And he would find a gem that belonged to the family. It's not that he forgot, it's just that an unforeseen incident occurred and his priorities changed dramatically. Sirius had to guarantee Helena's safety and stop Courtney's plan. And fulfilling that task was not as important in comparison. He could have tried to search on the way back, but Helena's strength was almost exhausted. And he thought he had lost the reward promised by the Duke. Sirius told Helena that there were no bugs and that there was something more interesting. He showed her the gold leaf, and told her it was stuck on her hood from the golden field. She said that when she was lost, she accidentally stumbled upon this very place, which seemed difficult to forget. Although the Duke said no one should know, as expected, Sirius couldn't tell her in advance. But now, he admitted that the Duke hadn't completely excluded him from this trial. And he simply had to participate in the trial to determine the clan's successor. And the leaf that fell on his hood was his task. Therefore, what the Duke asked him to find is called the birthstone. Although it was quite strange, the Duke asked him to find the stone without even telling him how to do it. Which meant Helena's father also had no information about it. Or he simply didn't want Sirius to know anything about this stone. Helena joked. Surely if Sirius knew too much, his father could immediately catch him using his abilities. If it is his father's doing, this incredible place will eventually also turn into something terrible. Elena understood that Sirius was forced to lie, but moreover he went to help her. Sirius thought Elena would be upset about the lies, but now he was glad that everything was in order. And every moment with Elena filled him with luck and happiness. Elena smiled and asked him to see how dazzling this golden petal was. And the secret he had been hiding all this time finally came to light anyway. The young man looked closely at Elena's face and touched her cheeks, which were burning with intense heat. The young man kissed the girl on the forehead and immediately realized that she most likely had a high fever. In fact, Sirius felt so relieved when everything calmed down that he didn't follow up on Elena's condition. In the end, Elena, falling asleep, couldn't open her eyes because she felt terribly ill. And the third day began with this crisis. Her condition has significantly improved compared to yesterday, when the girl was incredibly sick. And Sirius's only wish was for Elena to finally wake up and regain consciousness. While near the bed, the butler said that the Duke would really like to see Sirius. The Duke sat down at his table with a look of satisfaction and said that he had been waiting for him for a long time. 2 days ago, as soon as news from Courtney reached the Duke, he left the estate, accompanied by several close associates, and Courtney, who never returned, was labeled a traitor. The Duke reported that he managed to find out how Courtney contacted the Emperor, and it seems she did it through Carant, who was at the Loud Mansion. He always suspected they had an informant, but he never expected it to be the Emperor's right-hand man. And it was an incredible shame that the betrayal came from his own blood, that is, from his own daughter. If the knight is the Emperor's right-hand man, then Count Maximilian was his mastermind. And this plan must have been strongly driven by the Count himself, and if not, then the commander of the knights would not have been there at all. The Duke was sure that everything happened as expected, and yet it ended with his victory. Sirius managed to kill Carant, and as expected, this guy is worth much more than he thought. The Duke asked him to show him what he had brought, and Sirius confidently walked towards his table. He showed him what he brought, and, as planned, Helena would become the next empress. Undoubtedly, it was the family jewel that the Duke ordered to bring. Although he asked him to bring a stone, it turned out that the gold bread was the jewel he should have discovered. The Duke asked how Sirius managed to find it alone, since he had not given him any information. Sirius said that after leaving the forest, he saw it in the carriage, and he really doesn't know where it came from. The Duke wondered who would be sent to the Golden Field this time, because Sirius should be excluded, because the same person could not do it twice without creating an opportunity for treason. If Sirius asks for something, he needs Helena, and in any case, he should be busy with his promise. The young man whispered her name in the hope that the Duke would allow him to fulfill his wish. Sirius spoke about his wish, and unexpectedly asked the Duke to expel Helena from the Loud family. Until Helena became an adult, he always dreamed of living outside the dukedom, and he remembered this wish since childhood, when he promised to fulfill it. But for some reason, after this conversation, Sirius found it hard to breathe. And the only thing that allowed him to breathe here in the end was expelling himself. He left the Duke's office and ran into Joseph, who told him that Helena had not yet woken up, but that it was better to visit her quickly. The girl was still lying in her bed, unconscious, because she had a very strong cold. Sirius entered her room and hugged her tightly, and now everything he had feared before no longer mattered to him. He remembered the promise he made her when they were children that he would help her get out, and years later, he could still make it a reality. Therefore, he really wanted Alina to wake up and find out what he did for her. Alina has long despised his origins, and if she remains in this place, the rotten roots of the Layods will eventually spread and taint even the cleanest slate. However, the most problematic part was that Sirius was still close to her. The young man understood that this would never end as long as the Emperor lived, and that he would get stronger as quickly as he could. And only for this reason, he should not stay close to this girl until then. A few hours later, Alina finally opened her eyes and woke up, feeling much lighter after sleeping. She had a clear feeling that Sirius had been visiting her while she slept. And yet, contrary to her expectations, there was a strange atmosphere in the mansion. And her father congratulated her on becoming the next successor, but at the same time stated that she should not announce this to the public. The doctor left the mansion, wishing her a speedy recovery, and the maids said they would help her pack all her belongings. Alina felt as if she were about to leave somewhere, but the most alarming thing was that Sirius began to avoid her. And with this ignorance and loneliness, everything mixed into a heap, which was difficult to separate. She could not allow this to happen, so as soon as she saw Sirius, she immediately called him. She said that not only him, but the entire atmosphere in the mansion seemed strange. And Joseph did not give her any answer. She asked the young man if his father was really forcing him to do something. Sirius replied that he should have warned her in advance, but he could only tell her now. And in a week he would be studying abroad in the kingdom of Penelope. From what she heard, Alina couldn't even exhale or utter a word. Sirius said that if he found the gem, the Duke promised to grant his wish. He asked for Alina to be able to leave the Laud mansion. And all this only because, when she was a child, she really dreamed of a completely different life. Since childhood, she always hoped to leave this terrible mansion. And the thought of learning more about her mother never left her every day before bed. But now she didn't feel happy at all, and she was far from the Lodes, and this made it so that after this decision they couldn't be together. Alina called him stupid and began hitting the young man on the chest through tears. Outraged as to why he was doing this, she cried bitterly and said that he should have asked for a wish for himself. Obviously, at that time, she couldn't even imagine Sirius being by her side. So it was quite normal for him to leave her whenever he wanted, or so she thought. And now, more than ever, she didn't want to leave this place that had brought them together all these years. When she found him crying on his first day as a child, obviously from that moment she started worrying about him. Unlike the novel, in reality, Helena did not face the ruthless Sirius. And he was the one who was always there for her. And naturally, after many years of living together, she fell in love with this little one, who turned into a wonderful young man. As Alina knew how Sirius had been taking advantage of this opportunity, she couldn't help but say that they wouldn't take advantage of this opportunity. And as expected, it took both of them a long time to get used to each other's presence. But it was time for her to leave. Sirius asked the maids to leave them for a moment and promised her that they would leave soon. Alina cried and said it was a pity because she promised not to cry today. After Sirius told her everything, she cried every day since she found out the reason for his sudden departure from the mansion. However, Sirius never showed his tears in her presence, and the sadness that overwhelmed him was replaced by kinder feelings. Gentle and expectant, Alina felt that she really wanted to be close to him, but her destiny should be different. And if she remains as weak as she is now, she doesn't deserve to be by his side. Therefore, Alina promised herself to become strong in the future and return as someone who deserves to be by Sirius's side. Not only he will constantly protect her, but they will become equally dependent on each other. But for now, they had to say goodbye for a while, and Alina was informed that her luggage was already loaded onto the carriage. The Duke of Loud came out to say goodbye to her and told her that he hadn't seen his daughter in a long time. Alina said that thanks to her father's care, she was able to prepare well for her departure. To receive a diploma, she had to study for 5 years at the Penelope Academy. and prove that she was worthy of carrying the surname. Elena saw how worried Sirius was about her and was very grateful for all his concern. And strangely enough, today her father didn't scare her at all, and now every fragment of these moments was so small. And at the same time precious, that no fear could interrupt this precious moment. Suddenly, Elena heard the voice of Joseph, who also decided to accompany her and wish her a happy journey. She smiled seeing how worried the young man was and asked her brother to be careful. Elena said that she was grateful to him and that he remained her beloved older brother. She took Sirius's hands and told him that soon she would have to hit the road. Elena seemed very happy, although she would have to part with her lover for a while. But they understood that they were parting only to meet again. And Sirius promised to wait for her. All this time they were holding hands, and that exciting moment arrived when their hands had to part. Elena got into the carriage and sadly thought that the time had come when she would finally leave the law dukedom. And now that she thought about it, she understood that she would be alone there, and it seemed to her that she was about to cry again. Suddenly Sirius approached the carriage window and asked if something had happened. The young man said he wanted to remind her that last time he asked the lady to make a wish. Elena shouted that she could ask for anything, and Sirius was very happy to hear those words. His wish turned out to be quite modest, and he simply asked Elena not to forget him while she was at the academy. And even while there, she could always consider him her first and most loyal friend. Elena shouted at him that he shouldn't talk nonsense and that she would never forget him. The girl burst into tears and said that she would write a letter as soon as she arrived. So Sirius should tell her his new wish next time. Hearing this, Elena didn't know what expression Sirius had, and he was already far away. But the tears of separation kept running down her face. She only saw a blurry image of Sirius's face, blurred by her tears. And she would have acted completely differently if she had known that this was their last meeting.